Can we try? Can we? Falar aqui, depois falo eu. Não sei se está a ligar o fone aí.
Bem, minhas senhoras e meus senhores, sejam bem-vindos aqui ao Salão Nobre da Câmara Municipal de Angra do Heroísmo. Antes de mais, é um gosto receber este workshop sobre desenvolvimento sustentável, democracia e lei eleitoral na cidade de Angra do Heroísmo. Quero desde já fazer um agradecimento ao professor Tomás Dentinho pela iniciativa e devo referir que desenvolvimento sustentável, democracia e lei eleitoral efetivamente são assuntos muito importantes na nossa sociedade e que nos permite evoluir como sociedade e como cidade de Angra do Heroísmo. Sem grandes delongas, é mesmo só para dar as boas-vindas a todos vós e espero que os trabalhos sejam profícuos e que possamos sair daqui com mais algum conhecimento, mais alguns esclarecimentos daquilo que lidamos no dia a dia. Obrigado. Passo a palavra ao professor Tomás Dentinho.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the ones that are listening here and are listening online. This is an initiative supported by the regional government by the Direção Regional for Science and digital transition, and that provide a small support for the logistic terms. Also for the municipality of Angra that provided us with this wonderful room and also with the support for many things as usual. For the Association for Science and Development of the Azores with Elizabeth Martins that was able to do all these announcements, not only here in Angra and the Azores, but also around the world, hoping that people could be connected through the system that is created here, and also, of course, to the system that is allowing us to diffuse this talk on this important issue. As we know, as the development is moving more and more, the public goods are becoming more and more important in the provision of the normal goods that we have. And the allocation of public goods is made, usually it is the best system we have, is made through democracy. What we notice is that nowadays, we notice all these crises that are happening all over, that somehow the design of the political and democratic system and the electoral systems eventually should evolve, should be adapted, improved, and so on, to respond to the problems of the world and to the problems of proximity. And this session is mainly attached to this. What are to compare, to look at the systems that exist in democracy, and to see, to understand that somehow, at least in Europe and also in the United States, the systems that we had after the Second World War are a little bit in crisis or are a bit in turmoil. People are asking about the outcomes of the elections. Many people don't vote. There are parts of the public goods, namely related with the environment, but also with integration with the world, with global issues that are not there, are not represented by the national governments. And so this is an issue that somehow science, and mainly regional science, has to tackle. It's not only about technology, about big data, about biotechnology, about all these technologies that are very important, but these technologies required, and the problems and the challenges that they rise along with them, they require institutions, they require decisions by human beings, and not only private decisions like we do through the market, but also collective decisions, communitarian decisions that need some institutions, some rule of the game. It is to address this topic, which is obviously very important because it's a huge large sums of money, and when there is a crisis, the cost of this crisis, of these institutions related with the public decision-making, are huge. So there's this analysis, this debate on these institutions or on this rule of the game that we wanted to address from here, from the Azores, also because islands are the more creative places in terms of political institutions. If we go across the different islands in the world, the rules of the game, the rules of political decisions are very much creative, adapted to the territories, adapted to the technologies, and adapted to local culture. So hopefully we got very good people interested in this topic that came from outside. We have Professor Eveline Van Leeuwen that did a splendid job in editing a volume of regional science, policy and practice to interpret, to try to see, looking at the results of the elections, what people were trying to say when they voted for extreme parties, when they voted against the European Union, where they voted in terms that we found strange, that the journalists found strange, difficult to interpret, and he brought with an issue from last year this type of interpretation that also was done before with the Brexit, with Professor Andrés Rodrigues Pous. And this is this interpretation is one thing that we can do. More than that, we can see if another types of game in the democratic game could be better, could lead to better decisions by the people rather than what we have now. So, Eveline, thank you very much for your work you have done and for being ready to present here. Unfortunately, the Netherlands was locked down, but life continues, and we should continue to do what to interact with each other. Well, eventually refraining naturally if there is some barrier imposed by the pandemic. Also, Thierry Lebeaux, that he is a consultant, was a consultant for political affairs and for diplomatic affairs. He worked for the Commission for the integration, and he was educated, got a degree from the College of Europe in Bruges. Will also give us here a perspective on French system and also on a little bit on the European system. Then we have Andrés Rodrigues Pous from the London School of Economics that is doing a lot of work in institutions and also in innovation. The issue now, how can we innovate the political system, the public choice, in order to target the challenge of today, social challenges of social integration, challenges of global warming and environmental issues, and challenges of equity, apart from the challenge of growth and efficiency. So that's and Andrés Rodrigues Pous is from the London School of Economics. I'm very pleased that he's here for the second time this year. He came here in September for the Portuguese Regional Science Association Congress that was held in Territorial up there, and is here now, enjoying the sun when there is sun and reflecting on the weather when there is rain. It is raining, but now, he's well known all over the world, and I'm sure that not only in this small room, but also his talk and the others around the world will be recorded and will be seen surely. Then we have Paulo Casaca, a close friend of mine that was MP in Europe, so well known about how Europe works and about the failures and the good outcomes of the European process, and how somehow we can design a better system of participation. And the signal is that the abstention rate, the people that do not vote in European elections, it is enormous all over Europe, and so therefore something must be done there in order to improve the system. So abstention, it is in fact one of the great signals that somehow our system should be improved, and if we are not able to see these problems, so we don't deserve to be scientists or politicians in today, because, well, unfortunately we don't have here. Eveline and Paulo Estevão asked me, because the weather will be worse in 2 days, so if you can hear, eventually she will out of Christmas with his family. So his wife phoned me yesterday, okay, if you want Paulo to be there, of course Paulo will be there, but because there is the weather in Corvo will be difficult in 1 or 2 days, so I think we'll have this round table between ourselves, and because the type of mobilization that was required in this time by politicians, it was created a forum nearby, so we don't have here the politicians as we deserve. Eventually they will come, but anyway, science has a longer path than political cycle. So eventually our thoughts could be longer than somehow the conjunctural decisions and debates that are crucial, but it is in another sphere. It can be a good opportunity to talk with each other, but it will be through ourselves that are also sometimes have connections with our friends that are now in politics, but nevertheless we miss somehow this link today. So this is like a bullfight ring. When the bullfight begins, it's a pity that the house is not full, but then what matters, it is the spectacle itself, and I'm sure that we'll have a great section here. Thank you very much, Eveline. Thank you very much, Andrés. Thank you very much, Thierry Lebeaux, Paulo, Casaca, and the ones that are here. This morning we had a very nice course in the statistical department with Vasco leading, and today we are coming here to the municipal. Thank you to you and to Professor Alam and to Elena, that is also very helpful in these initiatives. Well, I stop here because we are trained to speak, so I will never stop if I don't stop myself. So, Eveline, good morning. Now it's up to you. Eveline is a very prominent scientist in regional science in Europe and in the world, and she's vice president of regional science, of European Regional Science Association, and she's based now in Wageningen University, which is a university that has all these relations with the environment, with agriculture, and which is very interesting for all these new topics that appeared. And as I said, she edited a very interesting volume on the interpretation of European results. Eveline, up to you. Thank you very much.
Oh, suppose you hear something?
Okay, you're on.
Yes, I am. Okay, thank you very much. In the Netherlands in a full lockdown, which we had not anticipated. It was very unexpected, but it started on Saturday. So unfortunately, I cannot join your beautiful island, and I've been punished by some very beautiful pictures of this weekend of some nice activities. But I'm still happy that I can contribute at least to a small extent to this meeting. And I will start share my presentation. And hope it works. You see the presentation. I can see my screen to a small extent on the screen. So I was asked to present something about the rise of populism in a European context. And actually it's based on a special issue that we wrote or that we composed for the Journal of Regional Science Policy and Practice. It's a very nice issue on the rise of populism, with a lot of very different and distinct contributions from people from all over Europe. And I'm also actually happy that I'm now at the beginning of this workshop that you have about sustainability and democratization and also populism, because then I can also set a bit the stage about what is important when studying these kind of topics. And that's also what I would like to do this afternoon. And so if we think also about voting behavior, perhaps about discontent, about the democratization, it's really important to start with why people vote, I would say. Sometimes when you also read articles about populist voting, about that kind of topics, it starts really at, let's say, the discontent of why people are in favor of certain parties. And it misses sometimes the motivation of the voting behavior, which is basically, of course, which is at the base of all this literature. So if we think about voting, why people vote, it's really about three important issues. It's first of all about motivation. And so what motivates people to go voting? And that can be responsibility, because it's your duty to vote. And I think that differs between countries, perhaps also between generations, if you see it as your duty. You can vote because you have the feeling you have something to win or to lose. There's something at stake. And also what is at stake differs very much for different types or different groups of people. So sustainability can be, you can feel it as it is your stake. It's something you want to contribute to. And that can be by changing your behavior, but also by voting for the right party. It can also be about immigration. If it's something that you feel really is affecting you, then it's something at stake and you might vote for that specific reason. And so there are different motivations or different perceptions of having something to win or to lose. A third aspect is also the trust in a political system. And I think we see it a lot. But if we trust the system, then we also think that our voice matters. And that if you want to make a difference or at least contribute something, that it matters that you vote. Now, if you don't trust that system, then you're also less likely to vote. And so your vote is lost, basically, and others get a higher weight in the overall elections and overall voting. Another important factor is the ability to vote. And of course, that's to some extent also related to the motivation, or the motivation is related to the ability. But also you need to be able to vote, of course. And you need to be able to think about what you vote and for what reason. So you need to have this physical ability, that you have, let's say, time. It's possible for you to go to a polling station, or if it's online, it's possible for you to vote online. It needs to be, if you think about a physical situation, it needs to be safe, it needs to be anonymous, it needs to be, to some extent, also accepted that you vote in the neighborhood where you live, for example. But also mentally is very important. So you need to have time to think about what you're going to vote, to reflect perhaps a bit. You need to be able to understand the program of a party. It needs to be written in such a language that you can understand it. And also you need to be perhaps, if you think about mental, it also depends on what others do and to what extent you're influenced by others and how that affects your mental state. And of course, there can be multiple obstructions for people to vote or not to vote. And that can be physical. If you're disabled, for example, then it might for some people be difficult to go to the polling station. If you are not allowed from your family to go voting, that might all be obstructions to voting or to not voting. But that's really important. There also, this was the nice picture that I added. And so this also results in a typical voter of people that are higher educated, higher income, age 25 till 45, which have both this physical and mental ability to vote, and often also a lot at stake. There are also a lot of regional influences in this decision to vote or not, and not even what to vote, but also in the decision to vote. And that's, first of all, group behavior, the social norms. What I said, is it your duty? Is it something that you have to do also for your family, or perhaps not? Also the share of people that vote, that do vote, it differs per region because of these regional influences. And also we know from the literature that feelings of identification and solidarity are very important for people to go voting. So stable regions where you might also trust the government, and those people living there are more likely to go voting. Also areas which have very similar people, so homogeneous regions. And so if it's more similar people, you're feeling more identified, or you're feeling part of the region. So then also you're more likely to go voting. And also we see often in less densified areas, so the rural areas where the share of people that go voting is higher in general than in urban areas, which might be to some extent less stable. It has more dynamics in migration, for example. They might also be less homogeneous, and also the social norms might be different in these areas. Well, if we then make the step to go to populism and how we can define populism, I think first of all it's very important to be very careful with what populism is, because it does has a connotation, a negative connotation in the concept. You can talk about left wing, right wing. You can talk about open or closed parties, for example. That is, if you want neutral, it is of course in the eye of the beholder, but at least the concept and the terms are neutral. But populistic voting has a negative connotation in there. And we need to be very careful because a lot of people are voting for these parties and for a lot of different reasons. But Canavan, he also highlighted a definition that's often used, that it's an appeal to the people against both the established structure of power and the dominant ideas and values of society. And here they say you have three groups, if you like, which is the right and nationalistic, which are often against immigration. You have the liberal populist parties, which are against bureaucratic elite, serving their own interests. So it's really against the elite. And the left wing, which is more against the elite of capitalism. So not so much the general elite, but the elite of capitalism, the rich ones and the ones that believe in globalization, if you want. And also a characteristic is that it often involves a strong and charismatic leader. So that are these leaders that are appealing and that are focused a lot on sentiments and so on. And for that reason also attract a lot of voters. Now, I also think, I already said, we need to be very careful because of the negative connotation. So if we classify a party as a populist party, you put, let's say, a negative label on the party, on the party, but also because there are a lot of dynamics. In the Netherlands, for example, we have the party of Geert Wilders, the party of the freedom, which is often seen as quite famous for being a populist party. And it's also a party that's already there for many years. And in the beginning, you could say it was quite extreme, had the standpoints that he had. In the meantime, I think his standpoints are less extreme. But that's also because the political arena changed and moved more to the right wing in general. So should we really say that it's still a populist party compared to the other parties that we have in the Netherlands, also traditional parties? I think it's much more difficult to say now. He's still quite extreme on immigration and in particular the Islam, but his other points on the role of the governments, on social welfare and so on are actually quite left-wing and central to the political arena we have in the Netherlands. So we need to be careful with putting labels, but also with sticking them on parties that change, and also the political arena changes. So is it still then the kind of the extreme parties, or are they actually becoming more central? I think also one of the reasons perhaps also is that politics is lagging behind, if you want. We have these traditional parties or the older parties, and often you still see that they think in terms of left and right wing. And while that's not what our society needs anymore today. And there are also other concepts of ideas of how to classify parties or voters. So more people that are about open or closed economy, people that are more nationalistic on their own traditions and culture, or cosmopolitan, that like all influences and that want to be a world, a member of the world instead of a national state. And also, of course, parties and people that are more oriented towards emotion versus reasoning, the kind of communication, you could say. And to some extent, I think that these older parties that find it difficult to somehow reinvent themselves and put them more into this, well, perhaps a bit scattered concepts and landscape of the political arena, by lagging behind and by still looking at it from an old point of view and having troubles in letting go of some concepts that are not relevant for today's voters anymore. They also give more possibilities and options to populist parties and get less voters themselves, while their ideas might be really useful and good, but they don't reach the voter anymore. And as Alessandra Vaggian and her co-authors also state, there are different shades of populism, which much more reflect also different feelings and sentiments in society. And finally, I also think that the politics are lagging behind, but also in our society today, there's a lack of positive expectations for the future across society as a whole. And we feel that we are in a phase also of transition at the world level, probably even. And we had those kind of transition phases before over history, after the First World War, Second World War, also much earlier, of course. But what's different this time, or at least what historians say so, and I tend to agree with them, is that then we had higher expectations of the future. Things would become better with new medicine, with new health policies or housing policies, with new inventions. And we would rebuild really our world, basically, our country. And today, across society, in different groups of society, we somehow lack this positive images of the future, which makes it also more difficult or easier to rely on emotion versus reasoning, for example, and also to become more closed and to stick to your own group. And so this relates also to the discontent, a concept also that Andrés Rodriguez Bose coined very successfully and very clearly, and also the reasoning of those that are lagging behind or feel that they're lagging behind, and which also is expressed in voting behavior. And also there we can see basically three levels in this feeling of discontent, which is first of all at the personal level, where Sandbu nicely describes it as the economics of belonging. There are groups of people that don't feel they belong basically to the economy anymore, and because the sector they're working in, for example, he also highlights, for example, young male adults that in certain, for example, in the US are used to work in mining or in much more blue-collar physical labor. And that kind of sectors are disappearing or are being autonomized. And there's a lot of demand in other types of sectors, such as the care sector or teaching and education and communication. But that are not sectors that feel like it's something for them, for these blue-collar men that want to be, let's say, the head of household in these kind of traditional regions. And so they don't feel that they can connect to these opportunities, and they're not belonging to the economic development that's taking place. And that does favor women to a certain extent. These type of skills that women often have are becoming more important in our society today. And so they feel they don't belong, and resulting in discontent and also acting against the system. But the regional level, of course, that also reflects in regional opportunities. So more unemployment and dependence on manufacturing, a lower income and education levels. And also as Dijkstra and co-authors, amongst which Andrés Rodriguez Bose, show that it's also about long-term economic development. So this prospects of a better future. If you are in a situation with long-term economic disabilities or less favors developments, people feel they don't belong to the economy of the country. And also at the national level in the Netherlands, for example, we also see that if you ask people how are they doing, you ask about their subjective well-being, for example, that's relatively high in the Netherlands. We are usually on the 5th or 6th place. Worldwide, I even think, or at least in the top 10. But then then basically what they say, I am doing well, but we are not. Reflecting that at the individual level, they feel okay, they have everything, or at least enough to be healthy and happy, but they don't feel that the country is doing well and that it's going into the right direction. Also still, so people that are doing well in terms of health and economics can be discontent with the way we are heading, the direction we are heading. And finally, also, of course, an important aspect also for this workshop is the democratic system. And so we want to feel heard also if we are voting. And in some countries like the UK and the US, where you have this winner takes it all system, basically, where there's only one single winner in a region that takes all the votes. compared to multiple winners and many more parties. So also serving the spectrum of ideas, that also is not good for the feeling of discontent and populist voting. And so that also brings me to the idea that if we think of populism and populist voting, that there's really this interdependencies or this relationship between spatial differences and discontent and populist voting, which also influence each other. And so we have spatial differences, in terms of people, for example, living in an area, and that can be due to sorting, as we call it. So similar people sort in certain neighborhoods in a city or in certain regions, which can be voluntarily because they can afford to live somewhere, or because they like diversity and they like heterogeneous neighborhoods with a lot of different ethnical backgrounds, for example. It can also be involuntarily because you cannot afford to live somewhere else, or you are in an area of population decline where you cannot sell your house anymore. And so from that perspective, you have differences in socio-economic backgrounds of people, resulting also in between and within regional inequalities. And these inequalities, of course, can also result in a feeling of discontent and in populist voting. And by this circle can really reinforce each other. So also urban-rural differences in experiences and norms and values. If you think about sustainability, that might be experienced in a city very differently than in a rural area, where you have in a city urban heat island effect, where you really have heat stress, where you have issues with water redundance when it's raining very heavily. Well, if you are in a rural area, you might see the issues with green, with the droughts, for example, with less biodiversity, and so you might have different experience in a you could say an overall transition and development in society, and as such also that results in different ways of voting and in a disconnect at the national level. Well, I think what's really interesting is there what is causing what? What is the reverse causality? And so to what extent is discontent result in populistic voting? Or is it the other way around? Is this populist parties that are very good at storytelling, at having an impact on perceptions of people? Is that resulting in discontent, these parties? And then also in spatial differences, because we also know that spatial differences in trust, for example, has a big impact on economics and on how the system is running as a whole. Sharon et al., for example, showed during the first COVID wave that in countries and regions where political trust is lower, there are more excess deaths during the first COVID wave. And so the importance of trust and discontent also on outcomes is quite clear, as we can see from several analyses. And so to which extent sorting also contributes to different contextual situations in terms of economic development or well-being is both a challenging and an intriguing one. And so to what extent the sorting of people contributes to different contextual situations in terms of unemployment, education opportunities, for example, and as such also reinforces a cycle. I think that's really interesting stuff for future research. Well, then I think also a very important question is it the people or the places that are left behind? And in our special issue, like I said, we had a lot of very interesting contributions, of which some said, well, it's the people that are left behind. It's about the importance of perceptions and the feeling of being left behind. So the feeling that the national government doesn't believe in you and doesn't invest in you. Even though that's to some extent also still related to the places, but the people feel left behind. And so Cooper and co-authors, she showed that there's a link between individual well-being and the social and political attitudes. So not directly towards voting, but to the social and the political attitudes, which resulted in populist voting, for example. And also Tubachi I misspelled her name here, I see. She looked at the link between expenditures on culture and Brexit, and she saw that in areas where they spend less on culture, people felt that they were left behind and voting more for leave, to leave the EU. Well, also, of course, there are clear results directing towards it's both the people that are left behind and the places that are left behind. Our study with Sol Maria Halleck-Vega, with whom I also wrote this editorial, we did a study on population decline and how areas with population decline vote more or less for populist parties. And there, if you look at the shares of voting, if you don't control for anything, you see that there are more populist votes in areas that face population decline. But then if you control for the type of people living there, and the people with that are more often unemployed, for example, that indeed do not belong to economic development, that miss out, these are also the people that more often live in areas of population decline, already explaining a lot of the difference. And then if you also take into account regional factors, like regional unemployment, so the opportunities that are there, long-term unemployment, also distance to The Hague, we took into account distance to the political center. And then there's no difference anymore between areas and population decline and any other area. So we can really explain this higher populistic voting by the people that live there. And also, so if a similar person would live in an area that is doing well in economic terms, they might not vote for a populist party. But indeed, the people that the type of people living in areas with less economic opportunities tend to vote more for populist parties. So it was not more. We didn't find relatively more voting for populist parties in areas of population decline, where you would expect some discontent about the future with this additional factor of population decline. And also a study showed that in Greece, for example, it's really both the economic and the cultural grievances that resulted in populist voting during their huge financial crisis, with the economic one being the most important one. Well, to almost end my presentation, I think it's really important to understand what voting tells us. So what is it? What's the message of voting? Is it really this anti-vote? Is it about discontent? Or is it also about what is inside the party, the differences in political views, standpoints, and the programs of the parties? For our study of the Netherlands, we took the PVV from Geert Wilders and the Socialistic Party, a left and a right wing, but we also took into account what's in their program. And the one is focusing much more on unemployment, and the other one is focusing much more on immigration. And so if you see that the people that tend to vote more for the Socialistic Party are also the people that live in areas with higher unemployment levels. And so it's not only this anti-vote, it's also because the contents of the program of the party. And also the PVV, it's really harsh on Islam and on immigration. And there also was more voting in areas with a higher share of immigrants. And so we should not only say, okay, these peoples are voting anti-system, but it's also what's inside the programs, and it matters for the people, so we should take that serious. I think it's also important to think, how does it relate to broader welfare scores? So how is broader welfare that takes into account not only the narrow view on welfare, like GDP, but also long-term and short-term economic development, social and environmental qualities, as well as personal health and well-being. How does that relate to the voting? Because it has so many dimensions of how we are doing. And we saw, for example, that the PVV, which is also considered more an anti-party, had high shares of voting in areas with lower broader welfare. And so it was not so much about this unemployment, but about the general broader welfare that influences people. And so, of course, what is causing what? What is the direction? So if we want to make it a difference for those people that feel discontent, where can we start and to make the world a bit better for them, so that they feel that they belong to economic development, they belong to the countries, and to the transitions we can make them jointly. So finally, solutions. Well, I think that's also for the rest of the workshop. I think it's very important, the trust and inclusivity. And so we saw that trust is so important for for a good economic system, for a good society in general, but also for the voting. So people feel that it matters, their vote, and that something good is done with it. Also, it should be inclusive. So programs and the political parties should focus on all parts of society and also speak the language of different parts of society. I think we should redesign some of the political systems and to get rid of some of the old classifications, how parties see themselves, and try and reinvent themselves to what is happening now and what is important now. I think also, and probably we all agree on it, is the high quality institutions. The government is so important this time. It needs to be high quality. People need to trust institutions, and also it should have facilitate our societies. And finally, I think the right communication. And so what populist parties can do very well is they can communicate with the people that they're appealing to. And it's not that we should really go into the traditional parties should really go also on the sentiments, but they should find the right communication and to being able to be heard and to say the right things, what they mean to the right people. So that's the end of my presentation. I will send the slides to Thomas. There are also some references at the end. I'm not sure if it will be possible to have some questions, but in any case, thank you very much for listening.
I'm listening. I'm heard. You are listening to me. Audience, if there are some questions, please come here in order to be recorded. So, Andrés, do you want to?
And I can hear you now, so
Okay.
something goes well.
That's a coercive way to ask questions. So nice to see you, Eveline, albeit at a distance. Just one question that I was interested. You're talking about the idea that people that have similar characteristics and similar attitudes end up living in the same places. This is like a great sorting. Are we going towards a world in which we become not just more economically polarized, but also far more politically polarized, and therefore we're going to have this permanent tensions between, on the one hand, people living in places that are dynamic and generally doing well, although not everyone there, and on the other hand, people that are stuck in places from which they cannot come out, or they are there mainly because their capacity to compete in the more dynamic places or to move to the more dynamic places is limited. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these interesting questions, and nice to see you as well, Andrés. As always, it's a thought-provoking question that you have, and I think there are multiple things playing a role there. I indeed think that, I take also the Netherlands as an example where we, for example, have a very harsh housing market at the moment, which really results in more sorting, because only the people that can afford it can move houses. And that's and during COVID now, for example, we see also a tendency of families with children, higher income, tend to move to the countryside, making also the cities even more diverse, with higher inequalities in the cities. And I think also today, since we have to work from home, there's much less interaction in larger groups. We really also remain in our social bubble, in our own social class. So also have less diverse ideas and interactions. And in addition, also, of course, everything was happening online with, I don't have to explain, but what is happening on Facebook and YouTube and all the way it's been programmed, that we tend to end up in our own bubble and go even, and no way of getting back to any diversified ideas. So, thinking out loud now, I think it really will mean that we become more polarized, also because if we think about sustainability and, for example, climate developments, that also will result in more inequality, just like COVID is doing, and thus more polarization and different viewpoints of reality.
Also, is whether, on one hand, your interpretation can guide the politicians to evolve into their programs for target regions, because this type of interpretation allows us that, in fact, people in this area are discontent because there was a party that spoke about unemployment and they have unemployment. So this information by the analysis of not only the political commentators but also by this type of work is producing something on one hand, or on the other hand you think that in a digital world the voting should be more diverse, so that so somehow people can choose not only the politicians but also the policies that they should eventually target, instead of having this debate that is interesting but it's more less objective. Thank you.
Well, that's a very difficult question, Thomas, and there might be, I think, more experts on the topic indeed of voting for topics. We also tried that in the Netherlands with a lot of referenda, and actually we stopped doing that because it didn't really work. I do think what is important in both is the communication and the language we speak. So to use a language that everyone can follow, basically, or having a different channels where we communicate to different groups, because we see that there are parties which have very good standpoints. And for example, I don't know if you have that in your countries as well, but we have this voting. So this kind of websites where you can, on several points, you can fill in what your opinions are, and then you will get the parties that fit you best. And often there are some parties that people are very surprised that they always show up high, because if you read their programs, and also I think that's also their true intentions in the case of those parties, they have in their programs, and their ambitions are good to a big group of people. But the language they speak, it doesn't reach those people. And so I think it's a lot in there is also on communication to the people, and also understand their way of communication and also what's important to them. So we can agree on the high lines, but on the practical side, it might be different for different group in our society. And so to also realize these differences and to make sure that we reach everyone in society.
Thank you very much. We keep the wave and then we pass to Andrés Rodriguez Poses for the second presentation. So, keeping the...
Thank you very much. Boa tarde. I'm going to put my timer so I know how much time I have. Yes, I'll take the... And if you can put also my presentation online. It's nice to see Eveline, but I think also you probably need to see my presentation. Sorry? Oh, well, maybe she can hear us. I think she was waving. Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation. It's very nice to be again in Terceira, an island I fell in love with when I came last year. Thomas has been inviting me for many years to come to the Azores, to come to Terceira, and I always thought it's far away, it's too far away for me to come. And then I just came and said, suddenly it's so close, and it's so nice, and it's so amazing as an island and the people here, so I'm really happy to be here. And what I'm going to propose is something that might seem remote in many ways, because it's happening perhaps not that strongly in Portugal, but as we have seen, no country is immune to these transformations. And since the topic of the workshop is about sustainable development and elections, I'm going to talk about one of the things that Eveline mentioned in her talk, which is the territorial and economic dimension, but also demographic dimension of the rise of populism, and what I call, in a sentence that has become relatively widespread, this revenge of the places that don't matter. Before I go into, and I think it's the battery that is gone, I'm going to get another. Okay, so something that I call the revenge of the places that don't matter. And for those of you that might be interested, there are 4 papers on which this talk is articulated. The original one in 2018, The Revenge of the Places That Don't Matter. That was followed by another one in the LSE Public Policy Review, which is The Rise of Populism and the Revenge of the Places That Don't Matter. And then those are the theoretical papers. And then the more recent ones, which are demonstrating the theory, which are called Golfing with Trump, that just appeared about a month ago in the Cambridge Journal of Regions, Economy and Society, and The Geography of EU Discontent, a paper with Louis Dijkstra and Hugo Pullman that Eveline referred to. All of them are, with the exception of The Geography of EU Discontent, are open access. So if you're interested, just come to talk to me later on and I'll send you the references or the papers. Let me start with the main problem, which is the challenge to the system. And you may not have noticed, but Thomas has referred to that, Eveline has referred to that. The political spectrum, the political panorama in Europe has changed and changed radically in the last 15 years. 20 years ago, we had extreme parties. They were not born yesterday in many cases, although some are quite new. But, for example, a party like the Lega in the 1980s and the different Legas commanded about 1.5% of the vote in a country like Italy. Today, the Lega Nord is no longer in government, but it has been in government. Syriza, extreme left party, also if you want populist, has been in power in Greece, as Fidesz, which is a party that was mainstream, traditional, right-wing type of Christian Democrats that has become radicalized. But also in the UK, we have had Brexit, and what we have is now in government a Conservative Party that is very different from the Conservative Party of Margaret Thatcher and John Major. In fact, it's a Conservative Party that has adopted virtually all the positions of the traditionally regarded as radical UKIP party, as was the same, for example, in the US with the Republican Party under Donald Trump. It seems like a lifetime ago, but when George Bush Jr. was elected, he was regarded as a radical within the Republican Party. Today, George Bush Jr., in comparison to Donald Trump, is a very, very mild, mainstream sort of politician. And this is something that is not confined to certain parts of Europe or America. It happens all over the world, and you can have populisms right and left of the spectrum virtually everywhere. So in some countries less, Communist Party in Portugal, that is more traditional, but Vox, for example, in Spain, that came out of nowhere, now commands regularly about 14 to 15% of the votes, and with a potential of coming into government. But this is something that is not new. There were precursors. I'm just going to highlight very quickly that in terms of Poland, you have on the left the map of the EU referendum in 2013. I have superimposed there the borders of the different divisions of Poland, the one in the late 18th century, the one after the World War, Second World War in 1945, in which you have that already there was this division between, let's say, the more western parts of Poland, the most urban parts of Poland that were more mainstream and opposition to the European Union, mainly in eastern parts of Poland, parts that were parts of the Russian Empire and that were also in rural areas, declining areas. That is a division that has been reproduced in successive elections, whether it is the presidential election in 2015 or the latest parliamentary election that took place on the 30th of October 2019. You can see that division between the west of Poland and the east of Poland, and then you can see places like Warsaw, places like Łódź, places like the big cities that normally vote more mainstream than the rural areas and the declining economic areas of the east. And the problem is that when something happens in Poland or when something happens in Hungary, we don't take notice. It's unfortunate because these are important and interesting countries, but it has to happen in places where you have the control of the media. Places like the UK, this is the map of the Brexit vote. When I woke up on the 24th of June 2016, I didn't go to bed. but I couldn't believe my eyes. And you already had a lot of people thinking, why has this happened in the UK? Why is there such a division between, on the one hand, Scotland and Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, but also between places like London, that appears in the map, and, for example, Boston, Lincolnshire, where 3/4 of the locals voted for Brexit. And then the big bang was, of course, the election of Donald Trump that was awarded by the swing in the vote of just a few states. Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin determined that, in this case, Donald Trump became president of the United States. And then it's, after every single moment, every single election, we're just waiting and seeing what's happening. Are we getting better or worse? Of course, depending on your political views. And you can say, well, we just had the German elections for chancellor not that long ago. And of course, the risk of populism has receded somewhat. It has receded somewhat also in the Netherlands. But this might come back, because this is something that it hasn't, the problems behind it have not gone away. And when you take a look, and this is the map that appears in this paper, The Geography of EU Discontent, in which we take one of the proxies of discontent, which is in this case Euroscepticism, and we plot it in 64,000 electoral districts in Europe. And we do it in national elections in the period that we had between 2013 and 2018. And what we see is that, on average, parties that are extremely opposed to the idea of European integration, so parties that actually want to dismantle, when in office, the European Union, got, in this case, more than 13% of the vote on average. And I just want you to see one thing. Take a look at the UK. So that's the classification of mainly the Conservative Party, but also votes for UKIP, etc. And you can see the color of the UK. Green is pro-Europe, below the average. Purple is anti-Europe, above this 13 point, I think it's 4% average. And take a look at the color of the UK, and now take a look at northeastern France or eastern France. Take a look at the north of Italy, in Lombardy or in Piedmont, or especially in Veneto. Take a look at southern Austria. Take a look at East Germany. Take a look at the Nordics. And you can say, well, if that sort of situation led us to Brexit, what could have happened? I mean, 15 years ago, it was impossible to think of a Jean-Marie Le Pen as president of France. No way. Now, having his daughter as president of France is no longer something that we can start. And hopefully it's not going to happen in spring. That's my personal view. I might agree or disagree with it, but it's something that could happen, and it's a distinct. President of France is no longer an intellectual. And well, this is going into more detail. Just take a look at the south of Austria, and then you're going to see, I'm going to show you a map that would explain perhaps why. Take a look at France, but also take a look at the Nordics. And when we put the extreme Eurosceptic parties together with the mild Eurosceptic parties that might not want to dismantle the European Union, but might want to get rid of the euro, which would be a big transformation, or perhaps restrict the free mobility of people. Like we're having to a certain extent now with the COVID-19. You can see that in first the vote doubles. We are no longer at 13%. We are at more than 26%. So 1 in 4 votes. And in 4 countries, Italy, Hungary, Greece, and the UK, we have more than 50%. That means that in these countries, we have had extremely anti-European, Eurosceptic, but also, I would say, populist parties in government. So why has this happened? And there's a lot of political science literature. I could, here on the 24th of June 2016, my colleagues in the Department of Government, the Department of Political Science in my university, already working on their computers trying to explain, but there are quite a few reasons for the challenge. Some of them are individual. And this is where the political scientists have been strongest. This idea that it's a question of aging. It's a question of old people. If you have a lot of old people, they become much more unhappy with the system. You want conservative, but conservative with a small c is not a conservative in terms of being politically conservative, is a conservative in life perspective. And therefore, I'm not joking. You saw some commentators in British television saying, we just have to wait for 10 years and all these people would have died and then we can join the European Union. I mean, I don't think that's a way to reason in any way. It's macabre, and I'm going to try to argue against that. It might be the uneducated, that these people don't know what they're voting for. I don't think these people are stupid. I mean, perhaps when they voted for Brexit, and you saw the people in Sunderland voting for Brexit, and Sunderland depends on Nissan. And Nissan is very much, it's a Japanese factory, but it's connected to exports to the European Union. They said, well, they don't know that they're going to suffer the most. But then they had 3 years to think about it. They were told what was going to happen. And in 2019, they voted for the most extreme form of Brexit, which was voting for Boris Johnson. So they know what they were voting for. But I'm going to argue why they voted in favor of that. You'll have also the people that are anchored to the place where they were born, people that are not mobile. They cannot move to one side to the other, that are stuck. And if they are stuck, they end up a situation in which they vote more for populist anti-system parties. You might have poor people. This is the idea that if you are losing out from a system, that you are destitute personally, you're more likely to be unhappy and therefore be in the throes of these parties. When you have low opportunities, and also when you have, or you're unhappy with the growing inequality, the idea of the top 1% in our society doing well and the rest of us not doing particularly well as a result. But on top of the individual characteristics, we have also geographical characteristics. And this is where the literature for North America comes in very strongly. This is the work of Jonathan Rodden in 2019 has been seminal. And this is just a map of the most recent presidential election in 2020. Well, now a year ago in the US, in which you can see this territorial division. In blue are the counties that voted for Joe Biden as president. And in red, what you have is the counties that voted for Donald Trump as president. There's a clear division. The bigger the county, the more you are in the coast, the bigger the city. You can see San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle on the West Coast, every city from Washington to Boston. But you also see Chicago, you see Minneapolis, you see Denver, you see Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, and Austin in Texas, all voted for Biden. Everywhere else, smaller areas, is Trump. So there's a geographical divide that is according to density of population and the size of your city. There's also the whole idea that I've worked on, which is industrial decline and long-term industrial decline, that you're losing important industrial jobs and therefore you are discontented with the system. Something that was mentioned by Eveline that she controlled for in the Netherlands, but we're doing at the level of Europe. You're far away from the places where the decisions are made. So if you're in Corsica in France, you're remote from Paris, and then you suffer. If you're in the Azores in Portugal, you might be unhappy with decisions that are taken in Lisbon, because they don't very often seem taken for the people, by the people, and for the people in Lisbon. And also the presence of migrants. So the idea that a lot of these populist parties on the right fundamentally have got migration and the presence of migrants as one of the holy trinity there. And what I'm highlighting is the growing territorial divide. The whole idea that you have places that have thrived and places that have declined. This is the map of economic growth in Europe between 1990 and 2015, in which we have a simple divide. And the simple divide is you are an overperforming or an underperforming region. What is an overperforming? Overperforming is simply a region that has performed over a quarter of a century above the average of the country the region is in. Underperforming is you are below the average. And what do we have? We have the French model, which is highlighted there. This is the French division of regions before the 2016 reform. There were 22 regions in France at that time. How many of those regions grew above the national average? If I hadn't shown you the map, you would probably have said perhaps 8 or 7 or 10 or maybe 11. So average, it's no. The answer is only 1. And that's the region of Paris, the Île-de-France. And when you have that, you're bound to be discontented. Of course, there are differences. If you're in Corsica, the gap is even greater. If you're in Rhône-Alpes, the gap is lower. But nevertheless, economic activity has become far more concentrated in Paris than it had been in any time in history in France. And you'll say, well, perhaps France is the exception. No, France is the rule. Because look at Portugal. We are here, and in this map I do have the Azores, not in the map I had. There's only one region, and which region is that? Is Lisbon. But that's also Greece, that's also Bulgaria, that's also Romania, that's also any country in Central and Eastern Europe, but the Nordics, Finland, Sweden, Denmark. Norway's not there, but I can tell you Norway's exactly the same. And if you push me, it's the UK and it's Ireland. In the UK, you have 2 other regions, Cheshire, well, Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, because that's oil, and Cheshire is because you have a lot of Manchester United and Manchester City and Liverpool football players living there. I'm joking, but there's a bit of reality in this respect. And there's another model which is not the French model, is what I call the Italian model. I could also call it the Spanish model, but I am Spanish after all, so I want to call it a different country, which is in a country like Italy that hasn't grown that much, it hasn't grown at all over the last 30 years, what we have is that all the regions that were above the average in 1990 have grown above the average, and those that were below the average have grown below the average, with increasing polarization across regions, concentration in Lombardy and Lazio. But even if you go to Lombardy and you look how many of the 11 provinces of Lombardy have grown above the average over a quarter of a century, the answer is 1, which is Milan. All the rest, Cremona, Pavia, Bergamo, have grown below. Como, etc., have grown below the Brescia have grown below the average. So this is something that is probably getting people unhappy in many ways. So, and you have different types of decline. So long-term decline might be a driver. You can have economic decline, you can have industrial decline, you can have population decline, demographic decline, which is something that in Spain we talk a lot about, but you have the same situation in Portugal. Population in Portugal grows on the coast. That's it. If you're from Elbas, like Tomás, your city and the surrounding area in Alentejo and in the center of Portugal, in Trás-os-Montes, they have been losing population for a long time, and you have employment decline. So the question is, when you put everything together and we do the analysis, and what drives the challenge? And there are some factors that matter. Of the individual characteristics, levels of education seem to be important and robust. Places with lower, people with lower levels of formal education tend to vote more for these parties. But here is where we start diverging from everything. When we do the analysis, we find that it's not the people that have got less money, it's people that live in declining places that are better off that tend to vote more for populism. So it's not the poor. The poorest of the poor in the US live in the big cities. The poorest of the poor in the UK live in the big cities. But they are not voting for extreme parties. The poorest of the poor in the ghettos of northern Philadelphia, they voted for Clinton and then they voted for Biden. Exactly like the richest of the rich of the suburbs of Western Philadelphia, who are among the richest in the US. It was in medium-sized cities in places like Michigan or Wisconsin, places that had been prosperous once, where normally the relatively well-off voted for Donald Trump, more than the poorest in those areas, also because there's a racial component in the US. Lack of opportunities is a factor, but elderly people are not. When you put it on average, on aggregate, yes, more older people vote for the streams. But when you control for where they live, it's not that all people are inherently, let's say, more populist or more anti-system, is that a lot of large share of elderly population is stuck in places that are declining. Either because they were born and lived there or because they have moved there later in their lives. Race matters, and this is a fundamental factor in the US. But what matters more seems to be the territorial dimension. Migration, not at all, and it depends when you look at overall migrants, the percentage of migrants. Normally, the places where you have more migrants tend to vote less for populists. If you rub shoulders like I am in London, where I am a migrant, but 40% of us are in the labor force are migrants, we vote less against the system. If you're in Lincoln, in Boston, Lincolnshire, in Lincolnshire is 3% of, at the time of the Brexit vote, 3% of the population that were migrants. And they were mainly migrants from Poland, and you normally cannot tell the difference when you see them on the street between a migrant from Poland and a local in many ways. So in that case, they had the highest percentage. Density and rurality, they matter, but they matter much more in the US than they do in Europe. And if you control for moderate populist, moderate anti-system parties, then the effect disappears. And distance to the capital, amazingly enough, is the inverse as what we expected. The closer you are to the capital, the more unhappy you are. If you are from Picardy and you have a high level of populists, you are closer to Paris, but probably you are more accessible to saying, well, we're very close to Paris, but we're being neglected by a class that has been in Paris, rather than if you are in Aquitaine, where you're further away, but you're more likely to vote for mainstream parties. And then what we find is that in the cases of Europe, the key factors, including with education, are long-term decline. In Europe, we find that it's mainly economic decline and industrial decline that is connected over the long term. Here we're talking since the year 2000, that is connected to far greater vote for anti-system parties, much more than demographic decline and employment decline. And why? I will argue that mainly because these places have been compensated and have had compensatory policies in order to try to prevent people from drifting away and becoming even more discontented. This is the situation in Europe, in which the drivers of this discontent seem to be training and education, and also, on the other hand, economic decline and industrial decline. In the US, the story is similar, but not exactly the same. What we look at is factors like economic decline and different types of economic decline, and social capital, as well as inequality within territories. What we find is that votes for Donald Trump, and not just votes, but swinging votes to Donald Trump, are very much connected to places that have been declining not since the last crisis, not since the 2000s, but going all the way back to the 1970s, so 50 years of decline, and in places that remain relatively cohesive with strong social capital. In places that are highly unequal, mainly the big cities, there's no connection whatsoever. And there are different types of decline from Europe. In the US, where you have a weaker safety net than in Europe, you have a less developed welfare state. The decline that matters is the employment decline and the population decline, to a far greater extent than the decline in wages and in income, in which you can say these people vote collectively because of their cohesive social level. And yeah, this is more or less explaining. We can see the levels of decline. If you've been declining since 2010, but you've been declining since 1970, every single year you do the analysis and it comes out the same. Economic decline, employment and demographic decline matters, declines in wages to a far less extent. And in fact, in the 2020 election, places that have done relatively well in terms of wages, but have lost population and have lost employment, are the ones that are more likely to vote for Donald Trump. So the question is, should we care? And I'm aware that I have 3 minutes, so I'll try to be very quick on this. Well, the first thing is, yes. Why should we care? Because the rise of discontent is leaving a lot of potential untapped. We always tend to think that, and we have been trained to think that dynamism comes from the big cities. But it doesn't always work like that. I mean, big cities are dynamic and they should remain dynamic. And we should cherish that big cities are dynamic. And when we look at Europe, where do some of our most dynamic industries come from? Well, the two real world leaders we have in Europe in furniture like IKEA or in retail like Inditex, Spanish company, they all come from Stockholm or from Gothenburg or from Malmo. Inditex doesn't come from Madrid or Barcelona. They come from Amsult, small town, now of 8,000 people in the south of Sweden, not particularly close to Malmo. They come from Galicia, so from Arteixo, not even La Coruña. So a suburb of a stagnating city that would be stagnated even more if Inditex was not there. So there's dynamism, and good that there's dynamism in Madrid and in Barcelona, but also there's potential here that is being overlooked. And then if you have a growing economic divide, you're going to have social and political polarization. And if you have social and political polarization, the economic consequences are going to be dire. I live in the country, I work in the country where this happens the most. The UK had been thriving as a result of European integration. Single market was a changer in the fortunes of the UK and of London. But you leave people behind, they become discontented, and then everyone loses. The people that were losing beforehand, the people living in London, and as a result of it, the whole of the UK, as we're seeing now. So what can be done? Well, we can do other things. So we have done a lot of things at the moment, and I'm not going to deal with it. We have done fiscal transfers. So you can have this sort of situation whereby London and the southeast put money into the common kitty and then the rest benefit. Madrid and Catalonia put money into the common kitty and the rest benefit, but then no one's happy. People in London are not happy. The Catalans say the rest of Spain is stealing from us, and then the people that are receiving the money are not happy either. You can do what we have done is public employment. And you have examples, but you tend to think that public employment is higher in the capitals where you have the decision making. No, it's never higher in the capitals. It's higher in the places that are poorest and declining. Going back to Corsica. France, 50% of the votes, 50% of the employment in a place like Corsica is in the public sector. Relative to, if I take a look at France, which is high, less than 30% in Ile-de-France. And are the Corsicans happy? No. 3 of the 4 members of parliament from Corsica are pro-independence populists. So compensatory policies do not seem to work. We can do like you have done in Portugal or we have done in Spain, build massive amount of infrastructure, very often connecting the remote areas. When you have that, you end up with underuse of infrastructure. If you build, and I could talk about this for quite a long time, development based on one leg of the development table, then the infrastructure, if it works at all, is to allow people to concentrate more in Lisbon or to concentrate more in Madrid, which is what has happened, rather than keep and give opportunities to people in these places. You need a much more comprehensive type of strategy. So we need a policy. We have a problem that is to a large extent territorial. So if the problem is territorial, we need a territorial solution. And that implies policy. COVID-19 is not going to solve the problem. So what we need is to intervene. Probably we don't need more policy, we need better policy. Policy that is different, that goes away from compensatory policies, providing welfare, so transfers of money, from sheltering the less developed regions from crisis through transfers, and from the big white elephants. I mean, I don't have time, but this is something that I've been postulating, and the European Union, the Commission particularly, has been very receptive. This idea of not just a place-based, but increasingly what is known as a place-sensitive type of policy that is strongly based on theory and evidence, that is sensitive to the different conditions of groups of regions and the challenge that they have, that taps into local potential, that addresses institutional inefficiencies, and that tries to offer portable skills for people to have the capacity to decide where they want to live and they want to work. I'll skip this one otherwise. So the conclusions is we have a geography of discontent that is reflected in the electoral system and is feeding decline, is feeding resentment, and resentment is feeding decline, and this is going into a downward spiral. So we need to do something. And we need to do something for these places that are falling between the net. At the moment, we have had, at the European level, policies that target the poorest regions, and that's fine. We should keep on doing that. But at the national level, what we have had is policies that, in theory, are aspatial, but they mainly benefit the big cities. Investment in R&D in a country like Norway, 80% is concentrated, public investment, in Oslo. In Spain, 3/4 go to Madrid and Barcelona. So you have to do something. I mean, it's not that you cannot promote development and innovation in these areas, but you have to focus on those that have been between the cracks. Those that have been somewhere that sometimes had dynamism in the past or were rich and have been in reverse gear or have been stuck for a long time. Portugal received a lot of money, it grew for a while, and then it stopped. So how do we address those issues? And how do we address it across the whole of Portugal? Just not making sure that the potential doesn't happen only in Lisbon, but it happens everywhere else in the country, including here in the Azores. So we need to fix the places that don't matter by tackling those areas that have suffered periods of long decline or no growth, by looking into industrial decline, by improving the employability and addressing the employment rates, by addressing the problem of brain drain, by also preventing, or not preventing, but making sure that talent remains here. If you train people in the Azores and then they all end up in Lisbon or in Frankfurt, in the long run, that's not sustainable. Addressing neglect and doing that, and also telling them that there's potential, because very often our decision makers have been telling them, get on your bike because there's no future where you are. You need to go where there are opportunities. But what is someone from Boston, Lincolnshire going to do in London when the competition is much greater, the housing prices are much greater, and the job opportunities, it's much greater competition from people coming from all over the world that can do the jobs perhaps better at a lower cost. And this has to be done, and has to be done relatively quickly, because the line between expressing your discontent at the ballot box and outright revolt is very, very thin. And we've seen it in France. I mean, now is the pandemic, things have come to a standstill, but before you saw that these people that were from places like Nièvre or the north parts of the northeast of France were saying, well, we want to tackle all these big policies that are necessary at the global level. We want to tackle climate change. But then you put a tax on diesel cars, which are highly polluting. But you in Paris are not going to pay for that. Why? Because you have alternative transportation. And you're sometimes, not all in Paris, but the poor have alternative transportation, the rich can buy their electric vehicles. We, by contrast, were told 20 years ago that we should buy diesel cars. In the meantime, we've seen all our services decline, public transport, our hospitals less, even our supermarkets disappear in some way. And now you're targeting our only mode of transport because public transport has disappeared, and we're going to pay for something that you are actually promoting. So we're happy, and you're going to see what the cost is. And if we go towards that conflict, we're going to have a situation which is far worse than we had before. I'm going to say, just finish with a political argument, or that we have a system that has got problems. And when I talk about the system, it's the model that we have given ourselves in the post-war period, and the model in the case of Europe, particularly of European integration, that has got serious problems, and those problems need mending. But we also have to put this in perspective. We have, at least my generation, not even my parents' generation, my generation is the first one that has had the biggest level of prosperity that we have ever experienced in history, the lowest level of inequality, despite the fact that now inequality is growing, and the longest in Europe, the longest period of peace that we have ever experienced in history. And this is something that needs to be preserved and enhanced. It can be improved, because if we throw it away, the alternatives that are being put on the table are far, far, far worse. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm staying.
Thank you very much. So before, well, Thierry. Can you come here?
Okay.
When you talk about the French model and the Italian model, about the difference of growth in relation to the average in the last years, there is one thing you didn't mention, is you didn't speak about Germany and how the region in Germany would compare, and would there be a specific German model? And the reason why I'm asking the question is because part of the acrimony against the EU, at least in the Eurozone, is about the overvaluation of the euro for most of the economy, which is meant to suit the German economic model. So that would be interesting to see whether there is any link between the overvaluation of the euro and the disconnect between the region in terms of growth and average.
Thank you very much, Thierry. And yes, you're raising an important issue. I'm talking about the macro level, whether who benefits. And of course, Germany benefits from a relatively strong and stable euro. Possibly the south of Europe and other parts of Europe don't benefit as much. I'm not sure I want to get into that because I'm passionate about this. And I'm not sure I completely agree. Why? Because I come from a country, Spain, where before every sort of problem was solved by devaluation. And in the long run, you ended up with more problems. The question is whether we have had a chance to restructure. We haven't done the right restructuring. And I think probably we need to be somewhere in between. But I'm going to highlight something that I think is probably as important, if not more important, that hasn't been addressed. That the territorial system in Germany is completely different. And the territorial system is one whereby across Germany, and there are two exceptions, in every single European country in the European Union since 1990, the capitals have grown, 26 out of the 28, I'm including the UK again here, have grown above the average, the capitals over the last 30 years. And in 16 out of the 28, the capital has been the most dynamic place in this period. There are two exceptions, which are Germany and Austria, in which the capital and the second largest agglomeration, Berlin, has grown below the average. The other one, the Ruhr, which is bigger, has not done particularly well. And what we have is a lot of dynamic cities that are mainly in southern Germany, places like Ingolstadt, places like Augsburg, places like Freiburg, places like Karlsruhe, places like Mannheim, that have been extremely dynamic, and that in these cities and in rural areas, they host what Simon calls the hidden champions. Companies that are world leaders in their field, excellent, but they are not concentrated in the big cities, in contrast to what happens in France, or in contrast to what happens in Spain, or what happens in the UK. And this is showing that if we want, and if we have the right policies, sometimes these are policies inherited from the past, we can have a much more even level playing field territorially that can promote prosperity in all parts of the country, although Germany has got a significant problem with the Eastern Länder, the former GDR Länder. And if we promote that, maybe we can see that although in Germany there's also contestation, the level of contestation and the level of votes for these anti-system parties in many of the prosperous parts of West Germany are far lower than what we see in the equivalent areas of France or the UK. We have to be careful because Italy has got also the same sort of territorial system as in Germany, and what were regarded to be the more dynamic industrial districts, they have declined, and they have declined significantly. So clearly there's a role here for, I mean, the macro dimension, monetary policy, who's benefiting from that, but also at a territorial level saying, can we think about alternatives, and alternatives that would make a more inclusive system that on top of that will contribute to, for all of us, for all, the whole of Europe, to fire on all cylinders and make a more prosperous, and as a result of being more prosperous, also perhaps less polarized from a political and social point of view Europe.
Thank you very much. Well, I have just one question. Is that whereas in this rise of populism, of these changes, sometimes the populists are in power. And so this will, the future is that will be an alternative when people get, well, notice that the populists cannot answer, or the system will collapse as is happening in Brexit or can happen in France with the Yellow Rouge. So that's the edge.
I'm going to be provocative here. And thanks for the question. I think it's interesting. There's an argument for saying, let these populists go into power. And once they are in power, they will show how incompetent they are, and therefore will go back to the old system, etc. Well, we had 4 years of Donald Trump. And of course, many of my friends that vote for Vox in Spain, or many of my friends that voted for the Conservative Party in the UK, they think that Trump did a great job as president. And when we put figures and we start looking, I mean, yes, it was low unemployment, but Trump started a war with China and had to withdraw with the war because now it mostly harmed American exports, whereas the Chinese exports to the US are at an all-time high in the last year of Trump, which was, of course, pandemic, etc. But nevertheless, in that respect, you can say we have had 4 years of Trump, and Trump was not elected by a whisker. A bit more than 100,000 votes combined in, I think it was in Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Arizona would have given the presidency to Donald Trump again. So we might have that situation. We're seeing what's going to happen with Boris Johnson and Brexit, etc. But nevertheless, Boris Johnson had a sweeping majority just 2 years ago, around this time. But I think the risk is even greater. I'm going to push it. Hitler was elected democratically. Then we stopped having elections. And then we ended like we ended up. So I think probably, and I'm going to highlight this, we have a series of global challenges. I hope we're not in that situation. But we have a series of global challenges. And the European Union is pushing to let's digitize, let's fight climate change. If we have Marine Le Pen as president of France in June, so right after the elections, we can kiss goodbye any type of dealing with global challenges across the whole of Europe. Because there will be possibly a much weaker Europe and a much weaker capacity to do anything we want, and a much greater opposition across the world and across other parts of Europe to do it. So we probably need to prevent and find the solutions now, not wait until they have had their time in office, because we don't know what's going to happen afterwards.
Thank you very much. So we are in a change to the political system in the second part of this workshop. Now I suggest that we do a 10 minutes break for coffee, some cakes, and then all of us will return and for the second part, which is about what will the politicians do about these evidences that came out of the analysis made by our colleagues Eveline and Andrés. Thank you very much. Hey, well, thank you very much. Now we are going for the second part of this workshop, where it is more about we somehow denounce the problems of the public choice and the places and people that are left behind. And now we are trying to discuss what can be in the electoral system, in democratic systems, what can be the solutions or the perspectives that we could find. So first we have a communication by Thierry Lebeaux. That comes from the channel, I think, between England and France, and that he's an expert and a consultant in political decision, and has had a lot of experience on the European Union, and also has some knowledge, of course, of the French system. And then we have Paulo Casaca to talk about the European system, and necessarily also in Portugal, how these systems can adjust to the challenge that are faced. Okay, Eddie, thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you very much. I put my timer too, so that basically I know when I need to stop. So thank you very much for the invitation. So it was a great surprise to be asked to come here, and this is without much hesitation that I decided to come. What I'm going to talk about is to look at the French system. I mean, undeniably, the French constitution is very strong. It has ensured, since 1958, it has ensured a very strong political stability, which is a large contrast to what happens between 1946 and 1958, where the average duration of a government was 6 months, with the shortest government being, did not survive after 15 days. So it shows that there was a high instability, which is a little bit comparable to that of the 70s in Italy. So the system is a strong one, but it's not foolproof in terms of democracy. And I think what we've experienced in 2017 and since is a good illustration of that. There is nothing to do specifically against the current president, although I think his personality explains for a lot. But I think it's more a bias in the system that shows that actually there are weaknesses which were not considered weaknesses at the time, which we are becoming now weaknesses by someone. Once the whole issue is about the mentality and how people understand the constitution and how they implement the constitution. Georges Pompidou was here a couple of years ago. Georges Pompidou said the institution and the constitution is as good as the people who implement it are. So basically, it is based on. Okay. So that was short introduction. Thomas, I introduced myself. Just here, finally, I decided to publish a book about that. And the reason for this book, which was released end of October 2021, is because I was, in 2021, basically I was fed up with the storytelling of the media about the nice happening of 2017, when actually it is something which is really questionable. So let's look very quickly at the French constitution since 1958. It is definitely a presidential regime. It followed, strong parliamentarian regime before that the Third Republic from 1875 to roughly 1940, and then the Fourth Republic from 46 to 58. So in the constitution which was designed by de Gaulle and Debray really is Michel Debray is the founder and the father of the constitutions. The whole system lies around the President of the Republic, elected initially for 7 years, and basically very strong. It's not impeachable. Article 68 was introduced in a later amendment to the Constitution that allows to impeach the president, but only in very selected cases. That's high treason, or when he's doing something which is clearly incompatible with the function. And then in that case, that's the National Assembly that becomes a high court or a high jurisdiction would have to deal with that. So it's very unlikely. He's not accountable to anyone except to the French people, because he's been elected by universal suffrage. So Mr. Macron so far has not given much account of what he's been doing, but everybody thinks he will be running for a new mandate in 2022, and then he will have to explain what he has done or what he has not done. But we understand also that there are ways for him to avoid that sort of things, and I will discuss that as well. And there is a total immunity, including for penal matters, as long as his mandate runs. Jacques Chirac was condemned after his term for things he's done before. When you look at what's happening to Nicolas Sarkozy, former president, who had a lot of issues with the justice for things he's done before, but also during, and that is strange, because he should not be sued for things he's been doing as a president, but he is, indirectly, but he is. And when you see how he's treated after being a president, then I think Mr. Macron, who's done a couple of things and he's got a few prosecutions against him for what he's done as a minister before he was elected, then the day he's no longer president, I think should have reasons to worry, but we're not there. So the strength of the president is the following, is that he appoints the prime minister. This is absolutely critical. People would think that in France, the prime minister derives from the general election and the majority in the Assemblée nationale are wrong. It does to some extent, but the president chooses. And when you look at what has happened in 2017, the prime minister has nothing to do with the majority which was elected after the election. But then it also appoints the entire government on the suggestion of the prime minister. But the prime minister will never suggest a minister that is not acceptable by the president. And again, here we would have many examples of people who were chosen or not chosen because of that. And then that's absolutely critical for what has happened in 2017. The president appoints most of the high brass, if you wish, of the justice system. The main judges and the key function in the judicial system are appointed by the president, which in itself is a problem in terms of separation of the power. And also there is a list of which is 3 or 4 page long of positions which are appointed by the president. The prime minister is accountable to the Assemblée nationale, not to the Senate, so he can be dismissed by a motion of censure, but at the same time, the president has the power to dismiss the Assemblée nationale in case there is an issue. This has happened for various reasons. I mean, in 1968, President Charles de Gaulle decided, after the turmoil of May 68, to dismiss the Assemblée nationale and then he had a landslides towards conservatives and Gaullists in the parliament to reassure his position, although he resigned a year later. And you also may remember that Jacques Chirac decided to dissolve the assembly because he thought there was a window of opportunity for election, but the French people never forgave him for dissolving the assembly for just political convenience. So he lost there. There is one specific situation, very interesting. It's the cohabitation, what in French we call the cohabitation, when we have a president and a prime minister which are of different parties. And then in that case, that's where you see that the prime minister, being backed by the Assemblée nationale, I mean the parliament, is very strong, because then the power shifts from the Élysée to the Hôtel de Matignon, where the prime minister resides. But that's only in that specific situation. Now, looking at what has happened of the constitution since it was adopted in 1958, there have been 2 main amendments. The first one is 1962. Charles de Gaulle, who always had that in mind, decided to, by referendum, to ask the French people that the president should be elected by universal suffrage, so everybody would vote for him. That would grant the president a tremendous power, and this is actually the case. The second major, and I think very controversial, amendment was in 2000, when the mandate of the president was reduced from 7 years to 5 years, which also coincides with the legislature, the MPs being elected for 5 years. And at the time when this happened, the general election for the parliament should have taken place in March, while the presidential election would have taken place in May. And the question was that, would that be fair for a president to be whoever would be elected, that was Chirac or Jospin at the time, would that be fair to have the president confronted with a parliamentary majority that obviously would be elected without knowing who would be the president. And they decided to, in what we call the inversion of the calendar, so to extend the mandate of the MPs until after the election. So the election took place in June, where the president was elected in May. This has also a major consequence, because the general election now have become a vote of confirmation. When President Macron was elected, everybody doubted that he would be able to have a majority for himself in the Assemblée Nationale, simply because he had no party. And basically the way he did it is he used exactly the same system as the five-star movement in Italy. So he called for internet candidates, everyone who had a little bit of an appetite, political appetite, who had 25,000 euros in cash to fund for their campaign, because he had no money for that. And that's the way he got it. And the French people thought, as Macron said just before the election, that never in the history of the Fifth Republic, since '58, have the French people denied a newly elected president its majority. So that's a vote on confirmation, and this is the situation that you have. But the other consequence is that with the mandate of the president coinciding with the mandate of the legislature, the president has become, in effect, the prime minister. The role of the prime minister has decreased very substantially. And when you look at the personalities which have been appointed as prime minister under Macron, you clearly have a sign of this. This guy has no name. Mr. Castex, who knew this guy before? He's got no political gravitas at all. It's not making an offense to say that. This guy was a civil servant. Mr. Philippe was well known by those inside the party, but absolutely unknown outside. And once Mr. Philippe started to have a little bit of his gravitas by its own, then Mr. Macron asked him to leave and appointed Castex. The idea of the government is there are no name. Macron, the president, is the government, which is, I think, very at odds with the spirit of the constitutions. Now, very quickly on the 2017 election, because I think there is a major issue that still needs to be resolved, and I think one day we will hear the end of the story. François Fillon was elected after the first primary that was elected with that was organized with the Conservative Party. It was an open primary. Everyone could just vote. They had to sign that they shared the value of the Conservative Party, and they had to pay €2, which was helpful to fund the campaign. And 4.5 million people voted. It was organized in 2 rounds. Mr. Fillon got 44% at the first round, which is tremendous, and 66.5% at the second round. So he was really chosen by a very large majority. He had all the credibility, which raised the problem when the judicial problem started. With such a legitimacy, it was very difficult to take him off, basically to disconnect him from the campaign. So on 25th of January 2017, there is an article in Le Canard enchaîné. It's a pamphlet paper. It's a satiric paper, very politically astute actually, but still very, very peculiar. Good readership. It's a weekly paper, and it was not even on the front page of the paper. So the Canard enchaîné itself did not believe in the potential of the story. It was on page 6 only of this. The following week, it was on first page, obviously, but not on that week. What is absolutely tremendous, I mean, the article was to say that Madame Fillon had been the parliamentary assistant of Monsieur Fillon for so many years, and she'd done nothing. Actually, there is nothing wrong in anyone employing his wife, his daughter, husband, mistress, whoever, as or lover, doesn't matter who. Basically, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that because it is allowed by the rules. The reason people have to understand that there was a time at the beginning of the Fifth Republic where they said we have to pay MPs a sufficient amount of money because that's part of democracy. But the problem is that the resentment in population, if you raise the income of MPs, would have been strong. So they said, okay, let's have a different way, which is they can employ family members and then indirectly increase their revenue. That was meant to be it exactly. And at the time, when on the 25th of January 2017, when this happened, actually Madame Fillon was no longer the parliamentary assistant of her husband for the last 4 years. But at the same time, you had, depending on the figure, on the sources, you had between 110 and 130 MPs, either from the Assemblée Nationale or from the Senate, who were in their situation, not counting the cross family jobs, if I may say, where I employ your husband and you employ my wife. That sort of things also existed. So if you add that, you get to, a very large number of this. But they decided to look just at Mr. Fillon. The particularity of Mr. Fillon, that he was obviously the Conservative candidate. I think it's very difficult to deny that there is a link. Now, within 4 hours of this article, of the publication of this article, the newly created Parquet National Financier decided to open a preliminary investigation. That is just looking at it. Normally, enquête préliminaire, so preliminary investigation, just lasts 2 years, 2 years and a half. But then in 4 weeks, it was completed. And it was on the 24th of February, the Parquet National Financier decided to open a formal judicial inquiry, this time allowing the indictment. The preliminary inquiry did not allow the indictment. But, skeptical people cannot just avoid looking at the connection between the 24th of February 2017, when the decision is taken to open this investigation, and the new law entering in force on the 27th of February 2017, which would have very seriously reduced the ability of the prosecution to go after Mr. Fillon because the rules of the statute of limitation would have changed. And basically everything older than 3 years would not have been prosecutable, which means that the last contract being 4 years old, it would have been extremely difficult for them to go after Mr. Fillon. So obviously the precipitation to do that is most likely, I'm happy to hear other arguments, but it's most likely linked to this this new law. And then it went very quickly. The indictment was announced on the 1st of March. It happens on the 14th of March. 2 days before the end of the deadline to submit applications or candidature to the presidential elections. So that left very little time for the Conservative Party to find an alternative solutions. But at the end of the day, on the 23rd of April, François Fillon just achieved 20.1% of the votes, and he was 1.29 points below or short of the second round. So it nearly failed. And Marine Le Pen was a contender. Macron was therefore elected against her by 65% of the vote, but he's a minority. He's the first minority president, if I may put it this way, as we're going to see in a minute. Political implication, I'll go quickly there, because first, Monsieur Fillon was prosecuted in a procedure without a plaintiff. That's quite interesting. That's very peculiar to the French political system. In the United States, in the UK, in Germany, and I don't know all the judicial system of other countries, but in most democracies, this would simply not have been possible. There would have been someone to lodge a complaint against Mr. Fillon for the justice to go after him, not in France. Imagine who could have done that in France. Would have been the government? Would have been a candidate against another candidate? Would have been a minister? That was simply not thinkable. So that is very peculiar, because without this peculiarity of the judicial system, which can seize itself, we can initiate a procedure by itself, this could not have happened. And all the people in the line, in the hierarchical line of the prosecution, are all linked to Mrs. Ségolène Royal. In one way or another, Ségolène Royal being the unfortunate candidate having lost against Sarkozy in 2007, when Fillon was the ticket for the program. But maybe I'm going a bit too far in terms of speculation there. Other similar situation where Bruno Le Maire, who's been for the last 4 years the Minister of Economy and Finance of Mr. Macron, his wife was a painter, an artist, has been his parliamentary assistant from 2007 to 2013. Nobody went to check what she was doing. Mrs. Fillon had a law degree, so you can understand that there is a relation between having a law degree and being a parliamentary assistant. It's less obvious, intuitively less obvious for a painter. But again, nobody can complain because nobody has checked, and obviously there is no issue there. But that can raise question. When Fillon, in his in a trial, asked the judge to look at others, the judge says, sorry, we can't do that because separation of power, we cannot look at what MPs are doing and how they're doing that. But that's exactly the point. Nobody complains about what Fillon has done as an MP. The only purpose of this procedure is how he did it, the fact that he used his wife. So again, very, very peculiar. So no discussion on programs. Obviously, everybody talked about Fillon. Very convenient for Mr. Macron. He had no program at the time. Fillon had worked for on his program for many years. He was very detailed, very precise, but no debate at all on that. And then, as I said, Mr. Macron was elected. 66% of the vote, I said, but 16 million decided not to vote at the second round of the election. 16 million people out of 47 million. So that's quite a substantial amount. And actually, Mr. Fillon was elected by less than 42% of the registered voters, if everybody had voted. That's the first president who has not reached the bar of 50% of the registered voter to be elected. But there is nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly legal and legitimate for this. It's stuck. It's stuck. I don't know how to... maybe another battery, so it's... Okay. That's the revenge of the things that don't matter, actually. See, yeah, that's right. That's the revenge. No, it's I'm stuck. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Okay, right. Thank you. So basically, these are. Yeah, that it works. Thank you very much. So basically, they thought the Velvet Revolution is the way it's not an expression which is frequently used, but this is the way they describe the new world, basically, as President Macron likes to describe his mandate. There are quite a number of oddities in the way the Constitution is meant to be. The first one, as I mentioned, I won't go back to this, is that you don't have political prime minister. There are no names. Basically, they have no gravitas, and that's exactly why they are they've been appointed. They don't need, they should not cast shadow on the president. Again, hardly any minister have any political gravitas. You have a few, mostly taken from the Conservatives, but all the rest, you see their name, you don't know them, you never hear of them. Mr. Macron is the one who governs instead. But the worst is that you have no role in the parliament anymore. Mostly for the key decision, including those who involve very strict or very severe restrictions of civil liberties, you have Mr. Macron talking on TV on decisions which have been taken in a small cycle without much consultation, and then the parliament will follow, and the parliament discover that while they listen. I mean, most of the MPs would discover that when they listen to Mr. Macron on TV, and then they implement the measure. This is not how it's meant to be. But systematically, all the amendments from the Senate, which is conservative, are completely ignored, and all the amendments of the opposition within the Assemblée nationale are also ignored. And you have also a number of things in terms of parliamentary investigations. There is also a number of deviation from the system, which I think some would qualify as narcissistic. Since 1875, the President of the Republic has been barred addressing the Assembly for various reasons, historic reasons. There was in 2008, President Sarkozy decided to change that and allowed the Parliament, so Senate and Assemblée nationale, to meet as Congress, so in one single chamber, and then the Parliament, the President would be able to address that. There can be no debate, there can be no vote. But what Macron has said in his program is that it would establish a Congress every year in July, where he would address and present what he says the bilan, so basically his achievement to the Parliament. Why would he do that? This is not meant to be. He's not responsible. He's not accountable. He cannot be dismissed, but he would still talk to them. And actually, it only happened twice because events made that impossible in other circumstances. But on the inception of the legislature, he talked first in the Congress, where the Prime Minister was only allowed to speak the following day. So basically, everything was said by Mr. Macron in terms of the general direction of the policy, and he did that again with the appointment of Mr. Castex. Although it was not a Congress, it was an interview he gave, and he ordered Mr. Castex to speak only after that. Most of the decisions are taken in the Council of Defense, which exists in the Constitution. It's Article 15, but it's meant to look at the defense of the country, as the name indicates. But all the COVID-19 measures are taken in Council of Defense, as if the question was COVID-19, how many divisions? This has nothing to do. But the point is that in that cycle, only the people chosen by the president are there, contrary to the Council of Ministers, which takes place on Wednesdays, which is where routinely policy decisions are taken. These councils of ministers now are, I mean, for most of that, they play no big role. The rule of law is in jeopardy. I won't go into too much into this, but you had Gilets jaunes in one specific interview. In June 2020, the former Minister of the Interior said something absolutely fantastic. He was told about Gilets jaunes because after confinement, Gilets jaunes wanted to go back in the streets and protest again. And he said, no way. The Minister of Interior, Castaner, said, no way. There is a prohibition for gathering of more than 10 people, even outside. If they do, they will be sanctioned. And then at the same time, Black Lives Matter organizations were proposing organizations and rally in the streets. And then the journalist said, so would that be forbidden? And in the same interview, the same person said, in principle, yes. But in sometimes you can understand that emotions are so strong that actually it can justify derogation to the law. So the same things, but not the same consequences for the people. That's a question of rule of law when the similar situation get to different situation. But then you had the counter power are not working. I've got no time to go into the detail, but the Constitutional Council has validated a absolutely blatant breach of the Constitution by the time of the first confinement. Not for the confinement itself, but I know, yes, thank you very much. But not for the confinement itself, but for the law that, or the rules that would allow French people to challenge the confinement with the Constitutional Council. And this required specific law, which in French we call organic laws. And organic laws are meant to take the time, not to be dictated by circumstances. And the Constitution provides specific deadlines before they can be debated. These deadlines were shortened, and the Constitutional Court, because of urgency, and the Constitutional Court agreed to the violation of the fast-track law on the basis of urgency. If you can understand that, I don't know, but that's the Constitutional Court should have said no. Conseil d'État, which is the highest jurisdiction, administrative jurisdiction, did the same thing in the sanitary pass, where the reason why he cleared it the first time, where the reason were not respected and were not contested or challenged after this. So the sanitary crisis management. So just to go quickly on this, you have two comparisons and the way it is done. The French system has been highly centralized, as I mentioned. All decisions taken by the president. All sorts of things were considered, very odd system. When you look at Germany, at the same time, they were completely, that's a federal system, even health is a federal competence, but the management of the crisis was organized at Länder, and it was so much more effective. And if you look at the figure, official figure at the 18th of September 2020, in France you had more than 31 people deceased of COVID-19, where in Germany you had only 9,000, with a population which is larger and which is older than France. So obviously the management was better. So how has it been possible? The first thing is that, and that's my last slide, the first is that in 2017 for the presidential election you had a very poor political casting running for election. Basically, you had Mr. Fillon or you had Mr. Macron. If Mr. Fillon was no longer able to compete, which was the case, and was the purpose of all this, then there were only serious candidate left, was Mr. Macron. All the strategy was there to push Mr. Fillon out of the race so that there would be no choice. And that meant that all the support from Fillon initially, once they realized with the indictment he would be unable to become president, left and supported Macron even at the first round. So that's unseen, unprecedented in political history. You have the threat of the extreme right. In essence, Marine Le Pen. Very convenient. If the choice is between me and Marine Le Pen, I don't need a program. I don't need anything. I just to say, vote for me. Because how crap I might be, what you have in France, the alternative, is crappier. And it's very bad. So you disconnect any debate about this. It's just, I'm the one that will save you from the disaster of the other. Very convenient. This is why Mr. Macron is pushing, very obviously, Marine Le Pen for the second round in 2022, precisely for the same reason, because then you have no debate. What he failed or what he succeeded doesn't matter anymore, because what would come if she's elected will be worse. The support of the media, it would require an entire session to look at that. How Macron prepared the medias are held by big industrial interests, and when he was minister, and this is, I mentioned a few prosecution going against him for that, when he was minister, he managed to please some of these industrialists who own the big media to support him. There is a whole chapter in my book to describe that. Unfortunately, I have no time to go into the detail. And then the last point is the personality. The same constitution has worked fantastically with other presidents, Mr. Mitterrand, Mr. Chirac, others, Giscard, De Gaulle even. De Gaulle was criticized for being a fascist in being. And the constitution worked well. So simply because, as Georges Pompidou said, and I quote him earlier, the constitution is only as good as the people who want to implement it. Mr. Macron has never been elected before. He never run a town council, was never a regional council, nothing like this. He just got into politics, into an elected mandate at the highest level. But he was not prepared for that. His program was for France was the startup nation, and he's running the country like a startup. This has nothing to do with the system. And basically, Mitterrand had said it in an interview just before he ran for the second mandate in '88. He said, the constitution is dangerous. The constitution was dangerous before I was there. It will be dangerous after I'll be leaving. It just take only one person with unstable temperament for the people to realize that it is dangerous. And I think this is what we are seeing today. Thank you very much. Sorry if I've been just a little bit longer.
Thank you very much, Thierry. Very, very interesting. But you described Macron as a presidential monarch. And we, from outside, looking at France, we have always thought that France had presidential monarchs. So to what extent is Macron so different from Mitterrand, from Giscard, from Chirac, from Sarkozy, from all the presidents, or most of the presidents that have preceded him in, I think it's the fifth, or sixth.
Yeah, the fifth, yeah. This is critical. That comes to the last point. It's about personality. Before that, you had people with very strong personality. I think this is required to be president. But before that, all the presidents have believed and implemented the constitution, which is the president is there to preside, the prime minister is there to govern and lead the policy of the country with the government. Macron, when he came, he started to do a couple of things. First of all, he arrived in power by destroying the parties. He destroyed the Socialist Party, 6% now, and I think they still have not recovered from that. And then he destroyed the Conservative Party. So the first thing is what basically he dismantled the pillar of democracy in France. The second element he said is that I want to destroy, I didn't put it this way, but that was what it came to at the end. I want to destroy les corps constitués. So basically, he wanted to bypass the media, pretty much like Trump has done, by with the media adverse to him, although he was supported by them. But he started to communicate directly through the social media and so on, in a way which are sometimes critical. But then he tried to bypass trade unions, by organizing negotiation by trade unions, but then saying, oh, sorry, guys, you're going nowhere, I have to take over. He did that for assurance chômage, so basically for unemployment support and a number of things. So basically, he changed everything that was working in a kind of collective system to use that for his own purpose. And that's the change of spirit, that's the way he implemented the constitution, which makes that he is so different from the other. And this is why what has happened with him could happen with anyone else. The way the counterpower is no longer operating is something of critical. I mean, it's critically important in France. So I think that's the difference: is that he sees his power as personal. Just a last example, I recall having read from him, I don't exactly know when it was, but something like 2 years and a half ago, there was a person who the media talked about. He was critically ill and just wanted to be assisted to die. And at some point, Macron in the media said, I cannot allow this man to die in the way he wants. Now, why would the president say, I cannot accept? It's not his decision. You would think it's the decision of an ethical committee or collective doctors or whatever. But no, for Mr. Macron, this was something that would come under his competence. And this is, this is simply not on. So that explains the difference, the question of personality.
We have this challenge to have Mr. Macron elected by the French that can affect all Europe, that Mr. Trump elected by the Americans that affect all the world, and somehow the European Union could play a role here. Is trying to play a role with Hungary, with the Polish, but not with Mr. Macron. So I wonder whether there is some movement within the European Parliament against this power, this Napoleon or this whatever, or this Louis the 14th, that somehow can balance and then in fact can control the effects, or can at least influence the effects of these democracies that have major countries that have a major impact on the outside, well, the Americans with wars and non-wars and whatever, and certainly the French or the British with Brexit and with whatever comes from France.
I think that there is an extremely good point here, which is France will have from 1st of January the presidency of the European Union at the same time as they have presidential election. So the presidency will go from the 1st of January to the 30th of June, and the Commission, France could have asked for that, but the Commission proposed to France basically to change their terms so that they would not collide with the presidential election. And France refused for obvious reasons. I mean, you are Mr. Macron, you're not going to pass on this, particularly because he thinks that can be very helpful for his own election. But that means that, I mean, the presidency of the European Council is not that important at the end. It doesn't change, it's not the life-making. But obviously, that will be a wasted presidency by what is seen as a big country, simply because this will be neutralized. Imagine if Germany had in 2017, second semester of 2017, had the presidency of the European Council with the election on 24th of September 2017, and Mrs. Merkel taking something the best of 4 months, 5 months, if I remember correctly, to have a government. So that means that for the entire duration of the German presidency, there would have been no government to take anything. So I think, in all fairness, they should have postponed.
Well, as usual in Portugal, we are delayed, but anyway, we still have, and good to know that Paulo Casaca talking about these political systems, and then a round table with the politicians. That will be in Portuguese. I'm trying to reinvent here, where we can translate a little bit to our colleagues from France and Spain. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Tomás. Thank you all for being here. Thanks very much for the municipality of Angra do Heroísmo. It's not the first time I've been here in the last few years in this room, and it is always a very big pleasure. I really enjoy very much your hospitality, and I think you are one of these places where we always dream of coming back. To a certain extent, I think I will be able to make the bridge between the discussions we have had up to now, which were perhaps of a large spectrum, of a large political spectrum, to the roundtable discussing the present challenges as seen here in the Azores. I think the electoral systems, well, the one of the Azores to start with, but not only the one of the Azores, the national one, the European one, are now being very, very much discussed. The Azorian one, as we know, it did have some changes in the last, during the autonomic period. There is a big expectation that following the elections of January the 30th, there will be a revision of the Portuguese electoral system, and this, of course, matters to the Azores in general terms, but also in specific terms, since if Portugal will make a different electoral system, this will certainly have impacts in the regional, the way that the region is being organized itself, and mostly at the European level. I mean, there is an ongoing conference on the future of Europe. Well, actually, this is not the very first conference on the future of Europe that is considering, well, a lot of things, but the most important of them, I think, it is exactly the electoral system, with a big push for what is called the Europeanization of the European elections, or transnational party lists, that according to the resolution approved by the panel of citizens, which is one of the things that is making part of this conference on the future of Europe. According to this resolution, if we would take it seriously, it should be in the future the single way of the European citizen to express politically himself. That is, there should be only transnational lists. The national list would be only in a transitory period. So, I mean, not that I think this is likely to be approved. I don't think it is. But this is something that has been ongoing for 30 years. And I do not think that we should ignore these sort of issues. I think that the ownership of Europe is really a crucial matter. And if we ignore it, if we keep it like something that does not relate to our daily life, we will tend to regret it sooner or later. Brexit, as any divorce, normally it has two responsible entities for making it. I mean, divorces normally are not unilateral, and we have to bear this in mind when we are considering the issue. Well, a bit, well, after saying that this is so important, well, I would like to say that most of the politologues that are dealing with the electoral systems, that they think that they can manage everything out of the electoral system. And I don't think this is the case. I mean, we have to start with, we have to lower expectations. Why do I say that? Well, for instance, the most complex, sophisticated electoral system I've ever known was the Hungarian one that was made after the fall of the Berlin Wall. I was actually there in the Hungarian parliament, who was making part of the National Democratic Institute, which is the institute linked to the Democratic Party in the United States, mission to Hungary to assist. I don't think I assisted nothing, but anyway, I did a bit try to understand what was going on, and it was the most complex system, and the system that tried to be at the same time have a link between the elector and the elected. There were uninominal constituencies. There were regional lists, regional circles, and there was a national, and there were a lot of conditions. There were, for instance, there were 2 rounds. I mean, the most sophisticated of the systems I've ever seen, and it actually only lasted 20 years. It was replaced by a much simpler thing after 2010. And actually, I can't say that this was really a big success in terms of democracy, because as we know, Hungary was considered by Biden administration to be the only European Union country that was not filling the democratic credentials to be invited to the conference that they made in the 10th of December. So that is an example showing that, a very good electoral system does not necessarily mean that we are responding to the expectations. And, well, other than Hungary, I mean, I think Thierry made a wonderful job speaking about the French example. I mean, actually, I was surprised myself to see that, the French electoral system, the legislative, I mean, you vote for a person, and you vote it in 2 rounds. I mean, how comes that the French just voted by for whoever that was found in the internet by a party that never existed, had no history, had nothing, and they just voted. He got the absolute majority, Macron, just like that. He did it. And actually because people were just saying, okay, we voted Macron, and now we are just going to confirm Macron, regardless of who was the representative. That's what I think that happened. And regardless of the fact that the electoral system of France is actually very, very sophisticated and performant, and guarantees a link between the elector elected and so on and so on. And we could quote Italy as well. You know, Italy is known for instability, but they actually changed the electoral system radically several times. Well, but the instability is still there. Well, not for the time being, not really, but Mario is taking care of it. But let's see, I'm not so sure it will last for a long time. And even Germany, well, Germany, everybody speaks about the German system. The most well-known think tank, political think tank, or oldest and perhaps the most prestigious, said, well, we must apply the German electoral system in Portugal. And actually, our President of the Republic said more or less, yes, I agree with it. And a lot of other people said yes as well. So this was very recent. Well, the German system, well, to start with, it's not really German. It's British, because it came, although the British never applied it, I mean, they never applied it in the United Kingdom, but they were the ones after the Second World War that in their zone of occupation tried the system. And so the system is fundamentally trying to couple the two principles. I mean, for one, you have to vote. You vote for your representative. It is a single person. You know who he is, a name, a photograph, a personality. Well, and you vote for a party. So you have two votes. And sometimes you vote for a different party from the member that you are voting for. You mean you think that this gentleman or this lady is fantastic and you vote for her, but she's from a party that is not really according to your sensibility, and you vote for another party. So you can do it with no problems. And this system, but even this system, there were inquiries made in Germany, and actually people, although the face of the member of the parliament is very clear, and they have to vote, for this person, most of the people did not really know who was their representative. And so the link between elector and elected, well, okay. I don't think we can expect too much of the electoral system. I think that the political system and the political culture are fundamental to determine where an electoral system will lead us to. Notwithstanding, this is a very important discussion. I would say that we have, I consider we have two, contemporaneously, we have two fundamental political pillars on democracy. Well, we have Popper, and Popper, in my view, he comes out of the tradition from Aristotle and many others, for whom the democracy is the ability to get rid of the bad government, not to ensure that you have a good government. This is this is wishful thinking. No. To get rid of a bad government. That's all. That means to get rid of a bad government, I mean, you really need to know who you are voting for. I mean, the winner takes all, or the majority system, as you prefer to call it, is the way to do it. I mean, you have one MP, you have one leader, you have one face. You think, well, things are not going well, you vote somebody else, the alternative. You vote him out. Okay, that's clear. Proportionality is a completely different philosophy, and it comes, I think it is embodied by Habermas, by the consensual, the concern with consensus. So we must take everyone in consideration. It's not only to get the winner, but we have to see all points of view. And so proportion, you have all the parties must be there. And it's a bit what we have in Portugal now. We have a party with the party of the animals, for instance, which is a very symbolic expression of this. I mean, the people that consider that the welfare of animals is a fundamental issue, and so this is a small, growing, but it's an important part, and they must be there. And people that are more conservative, more liberal, more whatever, I mean, and everybody is there in a different way. And the proportional system, most of the times, leads to coalitions. Not necessarily, of course, you can have absolute majorities, but most of the times to coalitions. And it is interesting to put in perspective that proportionality was something, I mean, up to the middle of the 19th century, the issue was not debated. I mean, democracy was to vote for someone, and who would have more votes would win. As simple as that. The concerns with proportionality started only in the middle of the 19th century. And in the most advanced politically advanced countries in Europe, like United Kingdom, like Switzerland, like Belgium. And it was Belgium that made the first proportional elections by lists in Europe and actually in the whole world. And it was in 1899. So you see, it was fairly recently. And there was an association for the adoption of the proportional representation that was created in 1881. One of its members, it's very famous, Victor Hont, and Hont is still the name. Hont also made a mathematical model for proportionality. That's the one we are following in Portugal, for instance, and in many other countries we are following him. It's a Belgian, it's a Belgium politologue, but this is something fairly new. Well, and for around 20 years, the proportionality became widespread in the whole of Europe. For instance, never in the United Kingdom, for instance, although it has always been debated. The United Kingdom has debated tremendously all sorts of systems, but actually kept the old one. And after some time, some concerns started to appear in terms of exactly the link between the elected and the elector, and also with stability. And so, for instance, the Weimar Republic is presented to have been the victim of this proportional system that was creating unstable governments. That's a view that is very questionable. But anyway, it is a bit dominant, this view of the Weimar Republic. Well, and even before that, I mean, Luxembourg was actually the first country where a sort of combination between proportionality and direct representation started to be taken into consideration with open lists. Okay, so I will not, the roundtable will discuss Europe. I will just keep on this issue that I think it's very important. Well, Luxembourg, up to our day now in Luxembourg, you can actually vote for how many elected. I mean, you have circles, you have 4 circles, something like that. 4 districts, sorry, circle is more Portuguese than English, 4 districts. If you, for instance, if there are 15 members in the district, you have 15 votes. And you can vote for whatever party. I mean, you can pick the number 13 of party A, the number 2 of party B, or you can do whatever with your votes. In Belgium, you also have open lists, but they are much less open. You have to pick a party to start with. You pick a party, you cannot vote for different parties. And within a party, you can say, well, I don't want the number 1, I want the number 12. And you just say I want to prefer the number two, or you can only prefer one. You know, there are loads of different sorts of opening lists. And so what I'm saying is that I think it is high time to bring this discussion into Portugal, and these concerns into Portugal. They have been around in Europe for a century. This issue of putting together direct representation and proportionality and stability. And I think now the issue of identity that has been taken for granted, that the basic identity is the spatial identity. And here in the Azores, I mean, nobody can test this. This is one of the major, I would say, constants of the system. That you, for instance, an island is an island, and you have to respect it as a district, as an identity source for representation. But this has been challenged very much, and you can see it on different bases, on different minorities, religious minorities, ethnic minorities, quotas, while the issue of gender, the issue of women, I mean, lots of things have been transforming this. And so these four issues have been going around. I think, just for a final note, you know, in Europe, I think that the debate has been completely divorced from the reality. For instance, here in the Azores, we always discussed for a long time, but the member of the parliament, the European Parliament for the Azores, to have a district for the Azores. Well, whether or not it's the best idea, that was the discussion. But actually, no one is discussing this in the European Parliament. The European Parliament goes completely the other way around. And no one considers the issue of the link between the elector and the elected as a fundamental issue to approach the institutions, the European institutions, to the people. And I think this is completely absurd, and this would give rise to a lot of other considerations, but I think that we can handle them during the roundtable. What I would like to say is that I think, and for the member of the parliament, Lamberting, she already left, she had to leave, she told me, but I think there are some members of the regional parliament, so I did understand. And that's very important. I think that you should not ignore what's going on in Europe. You should participate, you should look at it, you should influence it as full right Europeans that you are, that we all are here. And we should participate, and we should say, what do we think about political participation in Europe? I think that we have been silent too much time, and if we continue to be silent, sooner or later the results will not be good. We have to be present and to say, what do we think about that? I think that this idea of the transnational lists, closed transnational lists, because that's exactly what they are saying, it's completely out of what we need. It's a prescription for disaster. That's what I'm convinced of. So that's what I would like to say in the end. Well, thank you very much for your attention. Paulo? Yes.
Thank you, Paulo. We've discussed that privately quite a number of times, but you know, the turnout to European election is very low, 30%. If you look at, say, enlargement back in 2004 and 2007, the referenda for accession to the EU, the turnout were 90% and almost as many yes. And in the following parliamentary election from this new members, turnout fall to 30-35%. Now, probably the reason is that people do not see what Europe can bring to them. And the distance and the relation between the voters and the elected MPs is possibly also a question of the distance between the voters and the institutions. How can you reconcile that? If you have a transnational voting list, you make it even further because you're going to ask a guy from, let me be very French, a guy from Brittany voting from an MP coming from Algarve. How can you see them represented by that? So.
Well, thank you very much, Thierry. I think this is the crucial issue. I think that we cannot see abstention only linked with the electoral system. I mean, it has to do with political culture and with the political system. I mean, if you do not see, I mean, actually, why do we vote, for instance, in the national elections? Why most of the people vote? I mean, they are thinking not only on the member of the parliament, they are mostly thinking on the prime minister, of course. That's, I mean, what is the big thing that is on the, I know that Tomás will not agree, and so we'll see that, but it is, most of the people will say, well, the big issue, who is going to be the prime minister? It's indirectly what we are deciding, the power. And the outcome of politics. That's what we want to know. I mean, if you are voting for a parliament where you do not understand really what is the outcome, what is the power of this parliament, what comes out of it, why should you vote? I mean, this is a point. But looking only on the electoral issue, I think that Thierry is absolutely right. I mean, if we are going to vote on transnational lists where, according to the last position of the European Parliament, actually, there would be quotas for everything. I mean, the first 14 persons would have to be from different countries. And so it is more a nomination than an election, the way that you built this party list. And this party list, you don't know the people. You don't know who is your representative. I think it is going exactly on the wrong direction. It is not approaching the elected to the elector, but quite the reverse. And it is a prescription for disaster in the long run. Most likely I will not be here any longer, but somebody will, hopefully. And I think it is the duty of the politicians of today to look carefully on this issue and to own this issue, not to allow it to be seen just as a European question.
Politicians, please, our colleagues from Spinola, and I don't. So we are now trying to organize this final round table. Well, I think yes. Eventually, you have something. You should. Eventually, you have something prepared. I just had here some. Of course, there is a large debate on this. I also add this problem that I just felt with the Paulo Casaca, that somehow we have a system that also tends to people that are politicians become professional politicians in the long term, or those who stay there. Of course, internally they change, but whereas and so they don't want to change too much the system, so the system continues because somehow the rules that we have are kept. And then suddenly we have a major change in the system. So my question is whether we have a system that somehow implements the better public choice. So that's the crucial session. It's very good. We usually say that's democracy, fantastic, but the design of democracy, of the electoral system, is eventually interesting and crucial for representation. So we had a left-right system that, but new agendas are coming on environment, on all these agendas that the votes of the revenge reveal, that somehow the system that exists right and left, although we notice that it's easy for the existing politicians to move on, but what we notice is that, okay, this is still what Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa and the Social Democrats and Socialists still want to continue, but Europe is different for some time. So the change is there, and eventually we are able to continue in that system, and people and the parties themselves through generations will transform, but eventually it can be different. I just had here some questions about that I made in a questionnaire in the morning about the Prime Minister, well, like you said, it's chosen directly as in France, or indirectly through the Parliament, the House of Representatives, 2 houses or 1 house. Well, that was my feeling, but I had 0 votes. It's monarchy or republic. It does not matter here. The geographies. So we have circles that are adapted by to have 2 or 3 or 1 MPs per circle, or you have the circles as districts, and then with different numbers of MPs, and the proportionality of representation that we have here, the system of compensatory circle, which I think it's very nice, and I think that we should have at the national level, but does not exist at the national level, and that's why suddenly we can have, because the Central Democratic Party went up and down according to have more 1% or less 1%, then we have Chega that suddenly can win a lot of representation because it is able to enter into the communist region. So I think that these are the topics, but of course you are free to choose. So I ask you to be short, and then eventually Paulo or myself will translate into English or French, or and then we move on. Okay? So it's if you have shorter presentation, so that's by time. So if you have just 5 minutes and then 5 minutes, and then like a round table, I would prefer that because we are able to. So, or you can speak English as you prefer. It's better if you speak English, but if you don't want to speak English or you want to speak French or Spanish, then you can speak Portuguese, of course. So please go ahead. If this is connected.
Thank you so much, Professor. Yeah, I will. Thank you so much, Professor Dentinho, for inviting me to this lecture. I am Pedro Pinto. I'm a Christian Democrat. I was elected by the Terceira Island Circle, and I'm the only Christian Democrat elected in the Terceira for the Azorian Parliament. We are 3 MPs, 1 from São Jorge Island, myself, and another one elected by the compensation circle. I don't know if you are aware of our political organization, but in 2006 or before that, we only had a circle for each island. And since 2006, it was created this 10th circle. It is called the compensation one, which means that if a party does not enough votes to elect on an island or several islands, the votes can be joined in this compensation circle and maybe elect 1 or 2 of the 5 possible MPs on this compensation circle. So my party is represented by 2 MPs elected directly on 2 islands, and another one elected from this compensation one. And this was instituted in 2008. And before that, our parliament only had 4 parties: the Socialist, the Communist, the Christian Democrats, and the Social Democrats. And in 2008, it was elected two more parties. The extreme left, called Bloco de Esquerda, and the monarchic party. And on these last elections, 2020, three more, yes, the Communist Party left, and they didn't elect, and three other parties, they get elected from this compensation one. So now we have 8 parties, and I think myself that this represents more the Azorean society than before. And what happens, for example, for our national party, and we will have elections next January 30, will that in Azores we only elect 5 parliament members, and mostly the Social Democrats and the Socialists will elect. One will elect 3, the other will elect 2. So the other parties, they cannot have enough votes to elect Azorean representative for the national parliament. So I think that our system in Azores is more democrat because we have more representation of, as Paulo Dentinho, it was Paulo Casaca told before, we have a representative from the animal party, for example. And we have this extreme right that elected 2 parliament members. So our system is more balanced. Of course, for those that want to rule by themselves and want a majority just for themselves, they don't think that this is good because they have to negotiate. So at the moment we have a government made of 3 parties, the Social Democrat, the Christians, and the monarchic, and plus we need to have an agreement in the parliament with the extreme right and with the liberals to get the majority. So every time the parliament meets, we have to fix the arrangements to pass the laws. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose by 1 vote. But I think that's democracy. And I think that's healthy. That's healthy for the system, and that's healthy for society. For the past 24 years, we had a socialist majority, absolute majority. They rule by themselves. We knew for starting which were the laws that were approved and the ones that were not approved, because they ruled what they wanted to rule. And that was not good. And our abstention reached high above 50%. And last election, 1 year ago, one and a half year ago, the abstention lowered by 40%. And I think this is good. And I believe that if we make our government run through the end of the legislature by 2024, I think that abstention will lower even more in 2024. Because I think that people will get aware that the system is starting to work. So, the parties, they have to negotiate. And I think this is the essence of democracy. And I think it is good. About houses. 1 house or 2 houses. I think that in Azores, because we are only 235,000 inhabitants and spread around 9 islands, I think there is no need for 2 houses. 1 is enough. The parliament only meets in General Assembly once a month for a week, and that is enough for what we have to vote for. On the other 3 weeks, we meet in commissions. And so for our organization, this is good enough, and it works. The government president, the president of the government, arises from the parliament. He is pointed out by not the president of our republic, but from someone that represents him and has his powers here in Azores. So he's not voted directly, he comes from the parliament. But of course, during elections, we see the two biggest parties, the Socialists and the Social Democrats, asking to vote for them to elect the president of the government. And that is misleading. And for myself, I consider that is one of the reasons that people get away from politics. Because they realize they are not electing the president of the government. They are electing the parliament. They know that. But having these two biggest parties always asking the vote to elect the president, or in the national ones, to elect the prime minister, because in Portugal the system is the same. The president of the republic appoints the prime minister, is not elected directly. So this, for myself, is one of the causes that many people gets away from the political system, because they don't believe in that. And I think that we can make history in the Azores now that we have all these parties, because we can teach a lesson, at least to Portugal, that it is possible to rule a region in a democratic way. In a democratic way that we have to negotiate either with the left, either with the right, to pass our laws. And I think that's healthy for democracy. Thank you.
Question, but I can pass to you to speak, and then we move on with discussion.
Boa tarde a todos, um cumprimento aos presentes. Eu não ouço falar inglês porque não tenho, a oratória do meu colega Pedro Pinto nessa matéria e dos presentes. No entanto, vou tentar expressar algumas das ideias que me parecem fundamentais. Cumprimentar todos os presentes, a organização na pessoa do Tomás Dentinho e de todos os organizadores. Cumprimentar o Sr. Vereador da Câmara Municipal de Angra, meu amigo Paulo Lima, e dizer que efetivamente a democracia é o regime político que permite que os cidadãos eleitores participem, façam escolhas e participem efetivamente na produção das leis pela determinação, pelo seu voto, digamos assim, que imprimem, que depositam aos eleitos. Efetivamente, o sistema eleitoral é fundamental e é aqui como se fosse a engrenagem que permite o funcionamento de todo o sistema democrático. Esse sistema eleitoral, na nossa perspectiva, deverá ser sempre um sistema o mais representativo plural, o mais representativo possível, perdão, o mais plural possível, e que vá de encontro àquilo que são as expectativas e as necessidades das nossas populações. Não há sistemas eleitorais perfeitos. Aliás, tive a oportunidade de estar aqui a ouvir alguns dos prelectores, digamos assim, desta conferência. Não há sistemas eleitorais perfeitos. Os sistemas eleitorais tendem a responder àquilo que são as necessidades dos eleitores do ponto de vista da representatividade, do ponto de vista da pluralidade. Aqui nos Açores, nós, durante 24 anos, tivemos, como o meu colega Pedro descreveu e bem, maiorias absolutas de um único partido, o Partido Socialista, que fez com que o Parlamento dos Açores fosse, digamos, a caixa de ressonância do governo regional. O Parlamento dos Açores tem 57 deputados, 52 eleitos pelos círculos eleitorais de ilha e 5 deputados eleitos pelo círculo de compensação. A representatividade desta lei eleitoral, que foi criada e que começou a ser votada em 2008, a representatividade eleitoral ficou assegurada porque, à partida, cada ilha elege 2 deputados e depois elege os restantes por 1000 votos ou por 750. Portanto, isso vai permitir que haja uma maior representatividade em cada ilha. A grande novidade aqui nos Açores, do ponto de vista do sistema eleitoral, tem a ver efetivamente com a criação do ciclo de compensação, que o Pedro já descreveu aqui há bocadinho e bem, e que o ciclo de compensação permite que os partidos com menos expressão eleitoral tenham efetivamente direito a uma representatividade no Parlamento dos Açores. E é por isso que nós passamos em 2004. Em 2004 tínhamos apenas 3 partidos no Parlamento dos Açores, portanto tínhamos o Partido Socialista, o Partido Social Democrata e o CDS-PP, e depois crescemos nessa pluralidade em 2008 para 6 partidos e recentemente para 8 partidos. O que exige uma necessidade constante de interligação, de entendimentos para a aprovação daquilo que são as leis nos Açores. E isso é fundamental. Se nós compararmos, por exemplo, essa representatividade com outros sistemas políticos, nomeadamente em ilhas, e se olharmos, por exemplo, para as Canárias, podemos perceber que o nosso sistema político regional é efetivamente mais plural, mais democrático, mais representativo do que, por exemplo, o das Canárias. As Canárias, além de terem círculos eleitorais, portanto, têm 7 círculos eleitorais, nós temos 9 mais o círculo de compensação, que são 10. As Canárias ainda dividem, o arquipélago das Canárias divide por 2 províncias, o que permite que cerca de 17% do eleitorado, da população, tenha uma representatividade de 50% no Parlamento. E, portanto, efetivamente, no Parlamento dos Açores, essa representatividade é muito mais, enfim, é muito mais plural, digamos assim, e todos aqueles que votam, por exemplo, nos partidos de menor dimensão, sentem-se devidamente representados no Parlamento dos Açores. E, portanto, eu queria também dizer que esta representação política é aquilo que nos transmite autoridade, digamos assim, para a execução das leis. Porque os cidadãos, e face àquilo que são os altos níveis de abstenção nos nossos dias, os cidadãos necessitam de estar próximos dos seus eleitos, necessitam ter confiança nos seus eleitos, e o facto de haver este ciclo de compensação permite, digamos assim, essa maior representatividade. Dizer também que o Parlamento dos Açores está a rever a lei, bom, não sei se é a rever a lei eleitoral, mas está, digamos assim, criou uma comissão para o aprofundamento da autonomia. É uma comissão que já funcionou na última legislatura e que começou também a funcionar nesta legislatura. E nós, nos Açores, além de termos um ciclo de compensação, provavelmente iremos dar um salto ainda maior, digamos assim, naquilo que é a representatividade, a pluralidade e a aproximação aqui, o salto aqui na aproximação aos eleitores, permitindo, por exemplo, que os eleitores possam escolher a ordenação das listas de deputados, o que é é um salto qualitativo, digamos assim, naquilo que é a nossa democracia, a nossa representatividade. E, portanto, ficava por aqui para já. Muito obrigado.
Latin into from Portuguese Latin into Spanish Latin. Anyway, the points were more or less similar, so the compensatory circle was important in order to promote the paradigm of proportionality and allowed somehow a better representation of everybody. On the other hand, they are always also, and also to separate the two powers, the executive power from the legislative power, giving more prominence to legislative power, where dialogue without a clear majority is needed. On the other hand, they are trying to revise the system, eventually to allow the citizens, the electorate, to choose the names that are, or at least one, I don't know what is the system, the names that are in the list of each one of the parties. So the things are evolving quietly. I think that one, eventually, whereas in Madeira that is comparable, they are with the same party for 40 years, actually, the system, not only the fact that there are different islands, but also the system of proportionality allowed somehow an alternative system to work here. First Social Democrats, then the Socialists and then the Social Democrats again. So, and that is, of course, a good signal that democracy is working. I don't know if there are any questions. The question I would like to ask is whether this idea, we can have this system of choice of who is the representative, so somehow people are aware to choose the best person and so avoid this club system within each one of the parties. The other solution that I advocate, or I would like to think about, is also to look at the Azores, in fact, and there are these circles or islands that are smaller, 2 MPs to be elected, or 3. These are also eventually the best, or the most challenges of the government. So somehow the government is stimulated to choose good MPs for these small islands where there is more the proximity between the candidate and the people is higher. That's the case of Corvo, but also the case of Santa Maria, and eventually the case of São Jorge and other smaller cities.
Mostly all white, except
Yes, most are. So my question is whether, because constitutionally we cannot have circles with just one person, we should eventually ask for circles. I would like 2 or 3 candidates because of the mathematics that we have an hexadecimal system that can be adapted not to circles that are completely adaptable to the number of electorate, like it is in UK, but circles that can, for instance, in Lisbon, join parishes, and then in São Miguel for the regional elections, aggregate municipalities to get 2 MPs or 3 MPs if the system. So, but that's, of course, that is to approximate the system. So I think the quicker question, eventually you can disagree, is that to connect the voter with the MP, to know each other, to be in fact a representative. Otherwise, it goes through the parties, which can be a solution, but anyway, if we are detached from the left and right axis dimension, and if there is a geography of discontent that Eveline and Andrés is showing, that eventually we need to have, so the space becomes more important, and so the closer the representative is close to the space, the better, if, of course, there is this danger of separatism, of partial solutions, but it is appearing. So somehow the voting, the electorate is showing that the system does not work anymore. So that the system should be more regional and more closer. Now we call it populism but in fact they are the best leaders that people think that they will defend them. So that's a question for everybody. So that's my point. My question is for myself as well. So I don't want to, if you want to comment on this and on the other topics.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate. I think that for those who do not speak Portuguese, I think it is important to see that we now, or those who are not following Azorean politics. I mean, I am speaking on my own behalf. I am actually now independent. I was in the past. I was in the regional parliament for not a long time, but a long time ago anyway. And at that time there was an absolute majority of the Social Democrats, and actually it was a bit a reversal of the roles, and I'm finding it a bit interesting. But anyway, now I'm fully independent, but I think it is. I mean, we heard here fundamentally the appraisal of the present situation. That is, we have now a very large spectrum of political parties that are represented in the parliament. We have a government that is made of three parties, but actually backed by two others. So actually we have five parties involved in the majority, and it is a majority of one. So it is more, obviously it's more plural. I think it would not be fair to hide the fact that a lot of the public opinion thinks that this gives a tremendous power, king-making power, to small parties, especially in the extreme right, Chega, that is able to make a kingmaker, according at least to a large spectrum of the public opinion, position within the regional parliament. That's one of the issues. Anyway, this is a consequence of the proportionality. This is exactly the reason why, for instance, in the United Kingdom, the establishment never saw very well, a proportional representation. Why? Because, well, the third party, the Liberal Democrats, could have a tremendous power, to put the right or put the left, and disproportionate with their electoral basis. This was a bit the argument that was made. But anyway, I heard for the first time, I did not know, and I think it is very interesting to see that there is a possibility of open lists. Open lists are actually a very important feature. Although, you see, if you are confronted with a list of 19 candidates, I don't know how many there are in São Miguel, but it must be something like that. I don't know if it's 19, but 20 or something like that. I mean, either you do the Belgian way, which is you can only pick one, or you have to align them yourself. That's quite a task. If you have to align 20, who is the number one for you, the number two, the number three. So it's not very easy to see that, but I think it is certainly a very positive development if the regional parliament is doing this. But I think it is worth considering this so-called German system. I mean, there was a petition to change the electoral system that actually to reduce the number of members. I mean, that's one of the concerns that has been more spoken about, because 57 appears to be a bit too many. I think that this proposal really was not a good one, because it really made the system even less proportional than it is. I mean, giving the same weight to a municipality like Ponta Delgada to the one of Corvo and to all the others makes no sense, or even Angra and so on. So it was really putting the system worse than it is. I think there are ways you can also consider, nothing is simple, but you can also consider smaller parliaments. For instance, with the German system, you can have one single elected from Corvo, because you get the proportionality in the second vote. I'm not sure if this is exactly what has been thought for the national parliament. That's what has been proposed by Sedes, and apparently the President of the Republic said it was a very good idea. So it is a possibility. I think there is a lot of possibilities in front of you. Actually, this is a very good point that was made regarding the Canary Islands, because the Canary Islands are very, well, are much bigger in demographic terms, but have a lot of similarities. They have actually 9 islands, 9 inhabited islands, as the Azores, and there is a lot in common, and this is interesting. Although, in the Canary Islands, each island, each of the 7, I mean, the 2 smaller ones are depending on a bigger one, but each of the 7 has the Cabildo has a lot of responsibility. So it's different to see how the whole of the system is working. But that was a very good point that you made. But what I think is perhaps more important here is that the regional parliament will not stay out of these debates on the so-called future of Europe. The regional parliament of the Azores has a word to say there. The Azores is fully part of Europe. That's what I always stood for when I was in Brussels, and I think it is absolutely vital that you say that you say, what do you think, what the Azores Regional Parliament think about the representation, the future of democracy in Europe? I think you should have a word, you should not forget to do it.
Thank you very much. So I think now we can split into, at 6 o'clock we split in 4 tables of dinner to continue discussion. But if there is some questions for our 2 MPs from the floor, I will be, if not, Vasco, no? Okay, so I a final word to you 2 to say a final word.
Muito obrigado. Uma palavra final para dizer que participar neste debate, digamos aqui, assim que o Dr. Paulo Casaca também lançou aqui, o Dr. Tomás Dentinho, o Parlamento dos Açores não pode de modo algum, nem tem estado de modo algum longe destes debates da reforma do sistema eleitoral, até porque a autonomia o exige, e nós temos a possibilidade de, no nosso espaço geográfico, criar um sistema eleitoral que seja, que responda efetivamente àquilo que são os desafios e as necessidades dos Açores, mas que também seja um polo catalisador, digamos assim, da participação massiva dos açorianos. Ao mesmo tempo que é um sistema eleitoral que dá cartas a nível nacional, porque no fundo explica, digamos assim, ou exemplifica, digamos assim, ao todo nacional a possibilidade, digamos assim, de um melhor aproveitamento daquilo que são os votos dos nossos eleitores. E, portanto, quanto à questão do ciclo binominal ou ciclo trinominal, sobretudo em São Miguel e Santa Maria, eu penso que, sinceramente, esta é a minha opinião pessoal, eu penso que há uma discussão até dentro da classe política, digamos assim, de chegarmos ao ciclo conselhio nos Açores e, portanto, termos uma espécie de deputados conselhios digamos assim. Isso levaria a outro tipo de discussão, que não é a discussão que nos traz aqui, mas o que eu acho é que, do ponto de vista da representatividade e para a nossa dimensão, penso que estamos bem e que não há necessidade de chegarmos a ciclos binominais e ciclos trinominais.
Pronto. Sim, já se ouve. Muito bem. My colleague Rui summarized everything, which means that in the local, in the regional parliament, we are studying now a new election, the possibility of changing the election rules and making it, or trying to make it, even more representative. Whether with one or two houses, whether with several levels of lists, because at the moment the parties, they choose the list and people vote for the party. I really don't know if there is a space here in Azores for the candidates to be known before the elections, so people can choose the fifth or the 10th of a list of a party. Because to do that, we must be known by the people. People must know our thought. They must know what we do. And I really don't know if we have the space for that. At least the journalists are not interested in that. They are not even interested in the leaders of the parties, of the smallest parties. Furthermore, a candidate in 10th place, even in the biggest parties. So I think that that is one of the issues that we should think about deeply before changing the election system. I think that as it is by the moment, it works, and it works good. So let's give time to this solution, with lots of parties, so we can make a more an evaluation, a fair evaluation of how it works, because it has to do with the will of the parliament members. Paulo Casaca said that there is this kingmaker of the extreme right party, but they are only kingmakers because the other ones, they deny being part of solution. They deny dialogue, because on the day that the left, not the extreme left, but the social left, the socialist party, the day the socialist party starts to dialogue, maybe Chega won't have a kingmaker, won't be a kingmaker. So if they want so if they just want to complain about having now the extreme right in the parliament, that is bad, too bad to have them in the parliament, okay. They can be as they have been in the last year, and the extreme right will keep on being the kingmaker. But if they start to dialogue, they can annihilate the extreme right. And we have democracy, because the extreme right didn't arrive to the parliament because they wanted to go there. 5,000 Azorians vote for them. For the first time they went for election, 5,000 Azorians vote for them. And we should think about that.
Thank you very much for everybody. I think there is a question. There is a question. Sorry. General. I don't know. I appeared very much in the social media and never choose me. So okay, Vasco. Tira a máscara, pá, que não se ouve. Tira a máscara, que não se ouve.
Elections, because elections in the beginning, there is also image problem that people don't like politics, don't like parliament, don't like parties. One of the issues is common in Portugal, here in the Azores, in the national level, is when there are votes at the parliament, people don't see MPs voting, they see parties. Because even the parties are counted who is in favor, social party, who's against Communist Party. People don't see. And this reached an extreme of absurdity that even some elections, some voting, the votes are not counted well because a member of a certain party was not present. And then they remember, oh, he is not present, so the vote is not in that direction. If you are choosing the elected, and the elected doesn't have an image, a singular image, if you don't see it, I understand the way the parliament works, that the parties vote all in the same direction, most of the time. But if you don't see the elected voting individually, how do you approach the elected to the elected? Because you can choose. You can choose who you want to elect, but you're not seeing him voting your ideas, your aspirations. This is also a problem. It's not the election, it's the way the parliament works. You have to count each vote as one. Even if they vote all in the same direction for each party. You have to count them as one, and people have to understand. You are electing 20, 25, 30 MPs for your party. You're not electing one mind. Can I answer you with a question? I give him an answer with a question.
Yes, and if the answer is given outside.
Do you know in which place I was in my party in last elections? And do you know what I've been doing as a parliament member? Even if you want to pay attention
to the party that you represent.
Even if you want to pay attention, the only place you will find my work is on Facebook.
My Facebook. If you don't vote as one, people won't pay attention to you because they will only see the party voting, not you. They're not going to pay attention to your work as an individual, as an MP. They're going to pay attention to your party.
Okay, that's thank you very, well. Okay. Well, usually I'm in your position, but now I'm going to stop. You go ahead.
Sorry, but I will have to put the question in Portuguese. My English is not so good that I can put in English. O que eu acho que tem que ser bem definido é, a partir do momento que se vota num candidato, esse candidato vai representar os seus eleitores ou vai representar o partido pelo qual concorreu. Isto é, a responsabilidade de cada candidato e de cada deputado que está na Assembleia, seja regional, nacional, qualquer dela, é perante o seu eleitorado, as pessoas que votaram nele, ou é perante o partido pelo qual ele teve de se candidatar?
É perante o país.
É perante o país, mas o país partido ou o país...
Não é o seu... Neste Santo Agostinho, tu tens que as pessoas que pedem uma atitude particular merecem um ditador. E, portanto, o que tem que haver da parte da população e da parte do político é escolher a solução para o país, ou neste caso para a região, que é bom para todos, mas não apenas para a sua ilha. E esta é a grande questão, é que os políticos têm que ser não apenas representantes do povo, mas também educadores, ou seja, também os que trazem o direito, enfim, o direito de todos e a política pública. Porque isto não pode ser, o Parlamento não pode ser apenas uma soma de particularidades, tem que ser o todo. E aqui é que está a dificuldade, penso eu, e também, enfim, outras. Mas eu desculpem lá, vou parar aqui, está bem? Porque I'm going to stop here, because otherwise this is football and politics go forever. So we stop here. Well, we were few, but we were, I think I learned a lot with this interaction. With the politicians, with the experts, from different countries, and I think that it was in there, so it was record, and we can somehow learn from this and be responsible outside in political terms, in think tank terms, or in scientific terms, and as citizens as well. Thank you very much for all. I think. Like I said in the beginning, when the bullfight or the football match begins, it's a pity that the house is not full, but then the football match can be splendid, the best one, and it is in the film, so it can be recorded. Thank you very much.